Good evening. My name is Sarah Lewis. I am the Director of Planning and Zoning for the City of Somerville. The time is now 6:05. So I call this meeting of the Urban Design Commission to order. It is, what is it? It is June 8th, 2021. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, GLC 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, as well as Mayor Curtitone's declaration of emergency dated March 15th, 2020. This meeting of the Urban Design Commission is being conducted via remote participation. It is being recorded, and we can provide an audio recording upon request after the meeting. The members of the commission present this evening are myself, Sarah Lewis, Louisa Oliveira, the Director of Public Space and Urban Forestry, and we are the co-chairs. We have Frank Valdez with us, Andrew Abba, Deborah Fennick, and Tim Talon. There are also, we have Andrew Gomrinsky of Planning and Zoning is running the tech this evening. So if there are any difficulties, please reach out to Andrew for input. All right, and the first item on our agenda is going to be 74 Middlesex. This project has two components to it that need to be dealt with separately this evening. First, the building, and then the civic space. If the team could identify themselves by raising their hands, Andrew will be able to unmute you and share the screen for presentation. The thing that I will ask all participants, especially the applicants presenting this evening, this is a very, very full agenda. And it is important more than ever that you limit your presentation to 20 minutes. There will be time advice given as to when you have 5 minutes left, maybe 2 minutes and 1 minute as well. So please pay attention to the clock and make sure that we can keep things moving in a timely manner.
Sarah, I'll be recusing myself again from this project, so I'll be turning off my video.
Okay. Thanks, Tim.
All right, good evening. Ryan Souls here with Greystar, the developer advancing the project. Let our team gather here.
Yeah, do we have everybody?
Looks like we've got all the key stakeholders here. I don't know if Anthony might join us well, but good evening. Good to be back in front of the commission again to present our project. I think we had a great conversation last time, and have incorporated a lot of constructive feedback, I think, and great comments into kind of additional study that we're going to present here. And our slides are greatly reduced, so it should be a nice efficient meeting here. But we're really honing in on the items that you asked us to. So David's here, David and Mark with Elkis Manfredi, and Mick Young Kim will follow on the civic space separately.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is David Manfredi from Elkis Manfredi Architects. And Mark, I think you can put up the show. I unfortunately have a conflict tonight, and I'm gonna be very quick. But I didn't want to just not appear before you, because I wanted to let you know we have 3 outstanding items: the facade cladding, number 1; number 2, the penthouse; and number 3, the bike room and its relationship as active space to the civic space. And I wanted to let you know that, especially with regard to the facade cladding, you really caused us to go back and reconsider those 2 alternatives that 2 weeks ago, we called option 2 and option 3. And you're going to see that, as Mark is going to explain, that we have actually changed our mind in terms of our preferred direction based on reconsideration of the last couple of weeks and your comments. And our preference tonight is that former option 2. We think it's more different. We think more distinct. We think that I did mention last time about technical issues, which we think we have solved, and it will be our preferred alternative tonight. I'll let Mark talk about the penthouse and our story around the bikes, which we think is a huge opportunity. We've got a series of renderings to show you this evening. So I won't waste any more of our valuable time. I'm sorry I have to leave, but as you know, we came up on this calendar quite quickly, and so I very much appreciate the timeliness of getting back to you. And I'll turn it over to my colleague and principal in our firm, Mark Sardegna.
Thank you, David. Andrew, would you mind letting me share? Oh, thank you. I was looking for.
Should be good to go.
All right. Does everybody see a big red box? Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. So thank you very much, commissioners. And as David said, we I guess 2 weeks ago, went through the massing and the base, the main south entry, the canopy, and the storefront signage, and had consensus. And what we're going to show you tonight is our revised preferred cladding system, the preferred penthouse, and then what we think is a really exciting solution to the ground floor component of the building. So on the main body of the building here, which was formerly option 2, which is now our preferred option, is what we call a vertical fold, which is the vertical panels that span 2 floors with one single fold in a vertical dimension. And then they are kind of offset from panel to panel, creating a very simple but clear facade solution that we think is very distinctive in nature and creates a great body to the building, coupled with the base of the building, which we discussed last week. So giving us a clear base and then a middle, and then on the top of the building is the penthouse. We've come to the conclusion that we prefer the shingled option, coupled with the vertical fold. The composition of the 2 together, we believe, are a very dynamic but simple and clear facade articulation for the building. And then, as you can see on the ground, the lower floor, as the vertical fold intersects the base of the building, and the base that we chose 2 weeks ago with the larger front entry and the signage and canopy solution that was chosen a few weeks ago. And then this was 2 weeks ago was the third option, which is the faceted fold, which we studied hard over the last couple of weeks, and we really believe that the vertical fold is the chosen, the one that we prefer the most, that we believe gives a better distinction to the overall building facade. And you can see here the vertical or the faceted fold as it meets the base is a little complex, and we felt doesn't resolve itself as well as the vertical fold does as it intersects the base of the building. Oops. Did I lose sharing? How did that happen?
Hey, Mark, can you try sharing again?
There you go.
There it is.
Did that work? I'm not sure. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what I touched incorrectly. Did I lose it again? No. Okay.
No, I think
So I've lost being able to see my screen, which is interesting.
You're on Penthouse Smooth.
Okay. So I'm going to go back one. All right, so sorry about that. Penthouse shingled is our preferred scheme, which this is mixed with the not preferred body of the building, but we're hoping that this rendering of the top is a little clearer than a few weeks ago, where you can see the distinctive shadow lines of the shingling effect of the facade, which we think is very unique and dynamic, and really gives a fitting top to the building, and which we think is more successful than the smooth version. We think that this top gives a lot of texture to the building and is a fitting top to the overall composition, and gives a clear top, middle, and base to the composition of the building. On the ground floor, the conversation of is the south side a fitting address to the civic space that we're working on, which receives the Kensington Pass underneath I-93. And so we've worked on this a lot, where we believe that the disposition of retail on Middlesex Avenue on the corner is the fitting location, and our through block lobby to the north, to McGrath Highway, and to the future development to the north, which we know will happen. It's just a matter of when. And then how this building fronts the south. And so we've the bike storage, which is much more than a bike storage. This is what we're referring to as Bike Central. This is the hub of cycling and the arrival from the west. Most all bicycles in the west of Somerville of I-93 will all be coming through Kensington Pass. And this will be a place that you have to pass as a cyclist. And we want to embrace that. We want to embrace cycling as a mode of transportation, but also cycling as a recreational tool, and also integrate that into the overall dynamics of the lobby itself. Did I just lose you again? No? Okay, great. Sorry, I've lost the picture on my screen. So our intent here is to make this a distinctive entry for bikes, but have the look and feel of the building to be consistent with the lobby, using that back wall as a dynamic display for vertical bikes, as well as imagery that we'll show you in a second, and then incorporated a repair station that will be a manned bicycle repair facility, and coupling that with a barista counter, or it could be a juice bar or an energy bar, but it is a place of congregation and gathering that is focused on bicycles. And we see that, oh, I lost, sorry about that. Apologize for the technical difficulties. So we see that we've got very tall ceilings here on the first floor, so we've got the ability to really gravitate towards a vertical display of bicycles, and a dynamic display on the wall, and all of this is fronting our civic space on the outside, where we can tell a very interesting story of bikes. We'd love to tell the story of bicycle manufacturing that existed in Somerville, but also make it a display of bicycles, that we're able to hang bicycles from the ceiling and have a constantly evolving display. Potentially bicycle sales are happening out of here, but definitely bicycle repair and maintenance, as well as the storing of bikes for the users of the building and the visitors of the building. And that is our show. I apologize for the technical difficulties. And Should I return this back to somebody?
How would the commission like to handle this? Would they like to talk about the building first, as we did last time, and then go to landscape, or kind of have us go through the whole presentation?
I think that I would suggest we see the whole presentation this time. We sort of know what to expect. Does
Sure, absolutely.
that make sense to my fellow commissioners?
So Mark, I don't know if
So do
Andrew,
I?
you give me control, or if Mark gives me control. Very good.
I can pass the presenter to anyone. Oh,
If
and
you could pass it to Nick Young, that would be terrific.
yep.
Great.
Looks like it.
She has it.
I thought that I accepted control of the screen, but I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Oh, perfect. So we, we as well, we appreciated all the comments that we received. I think every time we receive these comments, both from the commission and working with Louisa, we just find that the design's getting stronger, it's getting clearer. So we just appreciate that. I wanted to just show a very small refinement that we've made on the building lot property, which is that we expanded based on the comments we received. It's kind of outdoor retail dining area. So that's pretty much the refinement that was made to this area. And we're still in compliance with the green scorecard. So we kind of rejiggered some elements in order to stay in compliance. So that was a very small refinement that we've made. And just to kind of jump directly into the Kensington Connector, the building parcel, and then also the neighborhood park. I'm not going to read through this text. I know this is very text heavy, but we wanted to just we've been keeping a running tally, and from the last meeting, we wanted to kind of see in the left column, this is what we've heard. And just in kind of broad brushstrokes, one comment that we received, I think from Andrew, which was really helpful, is understanding from the Kensington Underpass how we can make it more welcoming, coming through and understanding that shared bike and pedestrian pathway is an important future connector. Also understanding our parcel, the neighborhood park relationship to the existing plaza that's by the storage facility. So these are all things we started to consider, and I think that larger consideration transformed a lot of other things, kind of one thing changed to another. The other big piece was, again, I think this was from you, Andrew, which was really something that we saw after we heard you say this, which is that still it felt like maybe 2 pieces or 3 pieces rather than one larger park. So we put a lot of time into understanding how we could kind of take the strength of the transformation of the area with the water feature and the gardens and kind of expand that beyond the park. And then there were other kind of recommendations that we did integrate into the overall design. So this is what we showed 2 weeks ago. And so this is the area that I think it was pointed out to us clearly that this row of trees really divide this space from that space. And there was a comment, I think Andrea had made this comment, that this Civic Plaza feels wide. And I thought that this was 20 feet, but you have a sharp eye, it's actually 24. So we actually reduced this depth based on the requirement. But this is, and I'm gonna step forward. And so you can see that we've actually reduced the width of this emergency vehicle access to the required 20 feet by pulling the water feature upwards and more northwards, and the garden feature as well. I think there were some comments about this kind of entry point, and so we've widened this to 18 feet at this point, and then again here to about 16 feet. And so, and the other thing that we've done is, I think it was a important comment to talk about kind of opening up this civic flexible lawn space. And so we removed this row of trees with the benches, which I think did create a kind of division between this path and made it less welcoming. So we kind of really just opened up this whole edge. We added the storage facility plaza and really just understood those connections. And then the other big change was with Elkus Manfredi's team, you can see very lightly, this is the canopy line in this light gray. And so that got pushed in about 4 feet from where it was the last time we showed the project. And because we were able to gain a couple feet on this side, we were able to really create a much more green grove. And then instead of creating a kind of linear green, we made these kind of rooms where you could have seating that wraps around. And so just to show you the comparison before and after, this was more of a linear divider. And I think this really now opens this up. There's a door located here, so it really kind of, and then the geometries are angled towards the neighborhood park. So everything kind of moves in that direction. Whereas before, this was, the geometries really worked with more with the building and I think divided more from the Civic Plaza and the neighborhood park itself. We expanded the trellis and we're looking at kind of making that more vibrant in color. And I think that those are the big changes that were made to the park. You can see that now there's a real inside-outside relationship with the opening up of this outdoor room with the door into the lobby, and then just kind of opening this area up and then opening up these entry points so that they're more generous. They feel like they're more welcoming. And then just understanding the connection between the existing plaza and our neighborhood park. So it was requested that we develop a section as we were designing this. So you can see this canopy has gotten about 4 feet narrower. So it kind of came out to here before. And that really allowed for us to create a much more vegetated edge where you have it. And so this is the seating with the canopy that has the green roof on it, as well as the emergency vehicle access. We call it that, but it's really going to be a plaza that's 20 feet wide with the trellis structure adjacent to it. And the overall dimension of this through block plaza is 27 feet. And then again, with the open lawn. And so this is the cross section moving this way with the green buffer and the landform located here, kind of protecting you from I-93. Last time we were here, we had Jen from Atelier 10, and she's on the call today, but to really talk about the way in which we layered native green planting buffers to both mitigate pollution from Middlesex as well as I-93. And so this is the perspective view looking down. This is what we're calling an urban beach. And the water does look a little deep here, but we're really imagining a very thin sheet of water. So in the winter, when there's no water, it'll really be a plaza. And so we've added some planting on both sides of here to really make it feel like you're flanked by a garden, essentially, with the green backdrop, a flexible backdrop. And so that's pretty much our presentation. And I don't know if we want to, how you want to proceed, if you want to kind of start with the landscape and then go to architecture or go back to Mark. The one other thing that we are continuing to work on is to just really look at the paving here being related from inside to outside. So for now, we've committed to coloration, a way in which the colors of the interior paving and the exterior paving are related, but that will evolve when we get into construction documents.
I'm going to recommend, since we have this image on the screen, why don't we start the conversations actually with the civic space and then sort of move backwards to the building if that's acceptable to the commission.
That's fine.
Okay, so I am going to be chairing this part of the meeting then. Commission, what would you like to say about it?
Not used to such an active hand. I like it. So, I mean, I can go first. I think there are pieces of this that I really like and appreciate. I'm really excited to see that the tree grove, the angling of the spaces in between, and the variability of the pass-through zones, I think, begin to suggest that this could be less of a barrier than the previous version. I'm happy to see the trellis getting some color to it too. I think that is really exciting. I think that could be, really a nice landmark and a nice tie back to East Somerville. I think that's really helpful. And I'm excited to see those sort of circles, the tree planters on the lawn being taken out, and hopefully getting a little bit more dialogue between that space and the Kensington, the Kensington extension.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a dumb question that I'm going to ask you before, which I probably should have asked last week. I think it's pretty clear sort of what the Civic Plaza is made up of in terms of paver bands. What is the material on the shared bike pedestrian path? Like, it's a really cool pattern, but like what is that?
It'll probably be a hexagonal concrete paver, but we haven't gotten there yet in exactly.
No, I understand. It's just the other ones are very visibly paver, and it's a cool pattern. I just wasn't entirely sure.
I would say it's the pattern will evolve, but we're thinking that it would be different than the pattern in here, which would be more of a plaza, whereas this one would be probably some kind of hex paver that would be concrete. It could have color to it as well. One thing I forgot to mention that we did, Andrew, is we added this kind of yellow. We're thinking that this might be like an edging along the chalk walk, which will also be a paver. That's that kind of detectable tile that's yellow. So we're trying to bring a little bit of playfulness to the detailing, but that will continue to evolve as we're at like 30% DD right now. So we'll be continuing to work on that.
That makes sense. So the pieces that I guess I'm still a little hesitant on, that Kensington connection, it still feels, I'm not going to say it feels secondary, but it still feels like all of the program activities that really intersect with it are coming in at that sort of hard right angle. We've got sort of a little bit of a nudge on that yellow detectable. We've got kind of a filleting of the yellow, which is good, and I really like the use of that. Like, that's sort of a cool idea that we could do that. But it does still feel, it feels, with the exception of removing those, pretty similar to what we looked at last week, in terms of the actual sort of relationship between those spaces and that path.
I mean, one thing we had in a previous iteration that Louisa may remember is that we had a path that actually crosses through the lawn here. And I think through that process, we can kind of revisit that. But what we found is, as you know, this is a very small site. So this lawn already is really small. And so when we bisected the lawn, it just ended up feeling really tiny. And so I think we are seeing this as a major thoroughfare that connects, to the crosswalk, but really frames the park rather than is integrated into the park. It's something that you enter in. But we could explore the idea of bringing back this path and making this whole area. Now we have to make this green, but we could make this, we actually had a grove of trees in here in a previous iteration.
So for me, the bisecting walk is less of an issue. I think maybe if it shifted down a little bit, so it wasn't quite so centralized, so we're still preserving some amount of that lawn. But it just seems like something has to bring you into that space. And I truly don't think of the Kensington as the edge component. I think of it as a centralized moment, which I think I said last week too.
Yeah.
But I really want to make sure that the experience of that does feel prioritized and centralized.
Andrew, can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Is this a graphic issue, sort of where the path divides by the, I'm going to call it the COPS, sort of the little triangle right before the access drive? Is that part of the, sort of, is it a graphic sense perhaps that part of the read?
So where it divides, it's really hard not to be able to draw on this thing. So what is the specific, I guess, could you say that again?
I think, are you talking about right here?
No, oops, sorry. No, I meant even closer to Mystic and not free. Yes, that triangle there.
This is a suggestion, but on our part, we're not sure we really have purview over this area. I think our property line starts here. So we're really asking for at least to be able to see how our property line goes here. I think we're hoping that either our paving pattern can extend this way, or that the paving pattern that's in the Kensington underpass could come out and be a part of this, but that there's something special that happens here. So everything that's here is kind of a suggestion. We've kind of colored outside the lines a little bit with the hope that it'll influence kind of the development of this area.
So
Can I make,
go ahead.
Sorry, Andrew, just to that point, can I make a suggestion and see if it could be something that solves that issue? On the bottom area where it says garden seating, on the bottom right, is there a possibility to kind of open that up a little bit more so that there's more of an entrance on that side, and maybe add some permanent tables and chairs so that starts to bring in the plaza on that side as well?
You mean right here?
Yeah, Andrew, is that the kind of move that you're more looking for?
Right now, this is 18 feet wide right here, or maybe it's 19 actually from here to here. So it's pretty wide here. We could cut it back even further and have,
or maybe just add some furnishings so people when they're walking are going to be using that.
You know what? I like that. Like we could add like a bench here and some furnishing along this edge so that it feels like this is a place where, I don't know if you would wait for somebody on this side, but it might change instead of just having a curb edge.
That would help tremendously.
Yeah, I think that would be nice.
Space that's inhabitable, that it's not just a pass through, that it's not just a bracket to all of the cool stuff that you have in between.
I think that could really, and then because we're struggling, we didn't put the signage that we're gonna slowly plan into the project, but if we had a bench, we could then line signage behind it, and so they could all be cohesive. So that's something that we can kind of continue to develop.
That was sort of next question was, I had suggested shifting the trellis over, which I can accept that we don't want to do, but we had talked about potentially a gateway element at that moment.
Right here.
And I guess I'd like to understand what that is. Or if I'd still kind of want something that's a gateway element.
I mean, what we were thinking is that we don't really own this property. So I think we did look at a gateway element here in order to flank both sides. I think it would be a little bit more of an ask for us to kind of, for one thing, for us to put paving here, but I don't know what you all think. I mean, we're happy to design a gateway here, but we were kind of hesitant to kind of do more in this area, which is really not our property.
Louisa, is this something that we as the city might be able to sort of show what we want as a design and then think about it as a phased intervention or development?
Who is the property owner of that space?
It's the storage building. There are some easements on top of it, so I know it gets quite complicated. So what our rights are versus, it would be a conversation with legal. But I'm sort of inclined to, you know, as a planner, I play outside the lines too, Meg Young. So
Yeah.
sort of showing something that, you know, sort of we would like to strive towards. I am sort of, I'm open to that.
I think that we can make any suggestions we want. Whether or not we can have them implemented is another question. So I would probably lean towards trying to do something or that we know we can do that signifies an entry point on our property, and by our property I mean your property, and then try, you know, to have a second phase of that maybe we can advocate for and get would be a stronger gateway. But it's very hard. We can't tell people that they have to do something. We can ask people.
I'm wondering if, because what we're starting to do is design these kind of customized lights that will probably have some color to them, whether if we add some furnishing element at this corner, that there's some kind of lighted piece, maybe the back of the bench gets taller or something, and we light it, and that has some signage on it. So that instead of thinking of flanking, which is the way I was thinking about it, flanking both sides, we create a kind of corner piece that we really celebrate these two corners in a way that you really know you're entering. And I think that's something that'd be easy for us to do.
That would be really nice because it would project towards the underpass, and the underpass is, you know, until Brittany gets finished with it, it's a little dark and scary. So that would be nice to sort of.
So as you're coming from the underpass, you could at night see this kind of lighted piece. So I like these suggestions that maybe, because one challenge, and I may be wrong on this because I haven't been in the granular about the kind of the requirements, but if we add more paving, I think we run into some issues in compliance. And so if we can take a look at kind of adding these gateway furnishing, lighting kind of pieces that really welcome you, and maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's some kind of community piece of it, announcing information, at least on one side. I think that could be easily achievable within the confines of our site.
That would be nice.
Great. Take a look at that then.
I think the only other piece that I had is it's probably related more towards the building conversation, but the space that's right up against the building, the sort of on-site, for some reason it continues to sort of irk me that the paving pattern changes in that space. It again sort of, it feels like a privatization, the way that the paving pattern hits that line and immediately changes. And I think this section is really great. It's incredibly helpful. But I think it also sort of throws into question whether or not the bike room has the ability to be an active space based on this section, because it does feel, you know, kind of isolated by that tree grove and the benches, and it feels secondary, it feels separate, at least in the section, to what we're looking at that plaza. So it's again sort of part of a building conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we cut the section not at the place where you have the kind of plaza area, but where the planting is, so that you could see. I'm wondering if the commission could give us, I know we have to come back as we move forward in construction documents and things. My hunch about we're sort of trying to collaborate with the inside, outside of the paving of the interior, and would like you know, we could definitely bring this, and we did try this actually right after, the day after we talked with you guys about bringing this kind of linear pattern in. It just doesn't work with the interior of the building. And so it stops really abruptly at the line of the building. And I still think it would be nice if the window looked like it was just a kind of a glass divider, but that you were really the inside and outside kind of matched with each other, rather than the inside kind of, the outside line, that diagonal sort of jams up against this window. Just because it doesn't make sense for us to bring that diagonal all the way into the building. So I think this is a kind of, it's dependent on us designing the paving pattern, which we generally don't do till construction documents to that level of detail, but you know, we can definitely take a look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I can accept wanting that dialogue. I think that sounds great. It's just when I look at it, it feels like the private space is coming out as opposed to vice versa.
I think if I were to kind of say maybe this space is not private, but it is connected to the building. It's framed by the building, and it has more of a kind of, it's more of the inside-outside relationship that we were asked to look at. I think we have to either decide it's going to be part of the landscape and be part of the public realm, or part of the building. And so we'd love to hear your comments as we talk about the building, what makes more sense.
But I think, Nick Young, you're absolutely right. You know, I think we want the pavers on the outside and the floor material to almost be fingers that are connecting, that go through the glass. And again, it's a matter of picking those materials, and obviously we have the details of the slip coefficients of the outside. But we definitely want it to feel as a seamless composition from inside to outside.
So one thing we did do, and I don't know if it works, but we added a similar, we're proposing like a similar toned paver here to kind of make this feel less privatized. Like before, we had this as one direction and then this is another direction. So instead, kind of making this flanking similar color, even if the orientation of the paving changes, that this feels like one language. In fact, I think what we're trying to do is say there's an L, right? That there's a kind of embrace of this larger gesture around the green. But
Can I
maybe,
make can I make another suggestion that might actually help to blur these lines, which is something I'm going to ask you for outside of the committee anyway, which is that we have some permanent tables and chairs so that this park doesn't rely only on the movable stuff. And I think that could help. So when the movable furniture is not there, there's still a place to sit, eat lunch, etc. I'm not sure if the ones closest are, but that could also help having that same language throughout the park of the permanent tables and chairs could help unify that as well.
yeah, I mean, everything that's yellow is permanent. Everything that's yellow is in place. And then what we're proposing here is to take the stones that we have here and make those into kind of more like coffee tables, like slice off the top a la Noguchi, and kind of create these more casual seating areas. But these are all, we're not proposing that these get moved around. Louisa, you're remembering we used to have that because we had two different types of seating. You can see here, these were movable because we had to kind of maintain that emergency vehicle access.
Right, so what we find to be very successful is to have both. When it's summer and there's more people there, we put out a suite of movable furniture, but there's some permanent one as well for when the parks are less busy. Movable furniture also lets people get more comfortable. Sometimes they'll move so we encourage that in both, and that's a pretty easy lift, I think.
Yeah, so we could bring that back here, and then when there's an emergency, you just move them out of the way, or an emergency vehicle sort of plows through them. But maybe it's a different, we'll have to study whether all these furnishings want to be the same style. They'll be all off the shelf, or whether these want to be lighter. David always talks about wanting the movable furniture to be as light as possible so you can hold a sandwich in one hand and then, carry the chairs or wherever in another. So we can definitely add that in here. Yeah, where we used to have it.
That's enough of me for now.
Would anyone, Deborah, Frank, would you like to offer some comments?
Sure. I think the plan is really developed in a great place, and I really appreciate seeing the section. I can appreciate sort of the scale of things, and I think the canopy being pulled back, which I know is a building issue, I think is an improvement. I'm also looking to, understand how the inside and the outside are going to have a relationship, and it's, I think it's bigger than paving patterns. I don't know what the story is about the landscape on the inside, whether that is indeed landscape, whether there's a couple of trees there, and what relationship they have with the outside. But I think that would be, so I'm curious about that. And, I think without actually bringing the diagonals in, I think some of that geometry can find its way inside in linear elements. But the other thing I think is working against that integration of the pavement. There's a real sharp line at the edge, the northern edge of the green, the diagonal green sections and the pavement. And I think if that line either moved, that line separating the two types of pavement moved up or down, so there was a little bit of the green.
So one thing we did do is we pulled the tan colored paving in.
So it is.
The line of the planter doesn't define the interior inside outside paving, but it actually comes to this lot line here. I don't know if you can see that. My apologies. It's
the size of my screen. It's a little hard to see.
Yeah, I know. So where you see this red line,
I think that's a good thing. Yeah, and that sort of thing, that it just that those strong horizontal lines are creating zones, and I think that is working against the idea of this being unified. So I think maybe that happened in a couple other places. Maybe the major diagonal circulation parallel to Middlesex. Maybe there's a little bit of something that's a little more dramatic or something. But
I wonder if we take this tan paver and we fill this triangle with it on the west side, and then we bring the tan colored paver all the way down to this planter. So it's like teeth that sort of jogs in and out, and that might resolve some of the things that Andrew's talking about, which is might make it feel less private. The thing we can look at is what if this tan color paver comes all the way down, you get rid of this and this is all gray. But I kind of like breaking up this emergency vehicle because it's 20 feet wide. It's quite wide, and kind of having two different paver, I think will make it feel less like a road. But we'll take a look at that. These are all great suggestions.
I think those will help. And so to answer my question, are you designing green in the lobby, or how's that working? Is there going to be green in the lobby, and what relation?
Some trees, I think where it's a coordinated effort. So I think, we'll commit to kind of sharing. I think, Mark, maybe you could step in.
Yeah, our goal is if we can get some large trees into the lobby so that there's the inside and outside of green, we think is a great thing, because we've got incredible ceiling height in this lobby and allows for some really mature planting.
Yeah, I mean, these two sad trees that you see in the plan are not the design of the interior. So I think that's something that we'll make sure to share with you.
Yeah, and I think the way they're lit becomes very important too in the lobby. If you get some transparency, if it's bright enough, you get more transparency in the glass and a better inside-outside relationship. And I think the bike area, you know, I think that seems to me to be something that the intent is that something bright, and the renderings imply that. And I think that's a good thing, that the wall, you know, that muraled wall reads as the back end of the park, you know, so I think that's a interesting concept here. Yeah, no, I think this is quite lovely. And I think that most of, you know, the changes that you've incorporated, I think have improved it. And I really like the gateway ideas also.
Great. We'll take a look at that then.
Can I just interrupt for a second to do a time check? Andrew, how are we doing on time?
I think that we are way over.
Can we move to the building then?
Can we move to the building, please?
Yeah,
Or rather, can we take the vote on the civic space before we do that? Okay, so this is what we are voting for. That the through block plaza has met the following design guidelines that are found on page 514 of the zoning. Adjacent buildings should provide ground level spaces fronting onto the through block plaza for commercial uses, including, but not limited to, the arts and creative enterprise, eating and drinking, and retail use categories. Exterior walls fronting onto the ground story fenestration and blank wall standards for the appropriate building type. Upper story balconies and terraces overlooking the through block plaza are encouraged for adjacent buildings. So someone needs to make a motion that the civic space meets the design guidelines for a through block plaza.
So part of the requirement for the through block plaza is specifically related to those adjacencies to the building that I think are part of the conversation at the bike room. I don't know if we can, it's a little hard to, you know, I had some questions on the bike room that I feel like we need to be able to talk about before we say that they've met that requirement.
Okay, so do you want to go through the building and then come back and vote on this?
Yeah, but I'll be quick. I promise.
So maybe if you could give me permission to share, and we'll go visit the Bike Central, please.
Do I do that?
No, I think Andrew controls the technology.
The true Andrew.
You're all set, Mark.
Can everybody see that screen?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. So, this is a view kind of from the southwest looking to the northeast. Again, through the we're not totally coordinated on paver colors, but that will be coming as we continue the development of the building. But this gives a really good view of the base of the building, the reduced canopy, and then the integration of what we're calling Bike Central and the two-story space. That it's really an extension of the lobby that wraps around the whole southern face of the building, and the wall becomes a backdrop to the entire civic space. And we see this incredibly well lit, and that this is a bright, vibrant proscenium for the space in the foreground. And so, and again, we see this as a continuation of the ground plane going from inside the building to the outside the building. And there's actually no walls that separate the Bike Central from the lobby itself. This is all intended, and again, we're making the lobby a purple floor material, which it won't be. But we see this as a seamless material, that all of this is continuous, running north to the northern entry of the lobby, coming south and into the civic space, and going west to its own dedicated entry that allows you to enter on the west. But all of that is continuous and seamless as a space. There's no doors, there's no separation. It becomes part of an evolving dynamic of artwork of bicycles coming and going through the building throughout the day. And so, that we see as very integrated into the outdoor space. Where we are today, I commute by bicycle every day. In our building, we have 750 bicycle spaces, and there's a kind of a rich dynamic, a symphony of bicycles coming and going every day, and the integration of how it exists with the life of the lobby is very important to the environment we're in today. And we think this is a step up above where we live at the moment. And then ultimately having a place where it is a manned bicycle maintenance and repair component that you can have your bicycle tuned up here, we think is a great asset, not just to the building, but to this neighborhood and the district as a real asset to the public realm. And so in our lobby, these are our trees that obviously need a little bit of work, but again, we see the same kind of lobby fenestration on the interior walls, and that same fenestration and articulation is happening within the bike area itself. And then there was a comment about the glass. All of the glass at the lower floor of the building is all a low iron glass, so it is very clear and very transparent, allowing for as limited distortion of coloration by just the nature of the greenness that's naturally in glass, that we're trying to get rid of that so we can have a very clear, transparent viewing from inside to out and outside to in. So I'm going to stop talking because I know we're running out of time.
I promised I'd go quick, so I will, so that everybody else can talk. So I was a little bit, I guess I was a little bit skeptical about the bike room as an active use. And I think I still am. I think we've proven that a bike room can be attractive, but I don't know that I see it as being active yet. I think the colors are really nice. It looks really great. I think in this rendering, we're showing a volume of people that are lovely in the rendering, but nothing about the plan suggests any trajectory that would lead this amount of people moving back and forth along this corridor. I think it's sort of telling that there's no, people really inside in front of the bikes. It's really just the bikes in the picture again. I'm interested in your precedent images because I think they sort of speak to something that I think could be really cool. But in those precedent images, especially the two at the bottom, there's a real mix of the bike and the coffee and the retail, and it's all existing in one space. But in the plan, we really have the bike storage is shifted over all in one spot. We've kind of hidden the bike fixation station away from view. And then the coffee is not, it's not what we're seeing here in terms of being a bar, being sort of interactive. It feels like it's just sort of shifted and almost like a gate station that's really part of the lobby more so. And it does still bother me that if we're going to celebrate bikes, that we're really forcing them to enter just sort of way over on the edge on the alley next to the highway. Like it just doesn't compute for me. And I want it to. Like I want that mix of things that you guys are showing in the precedents, so that everything seems parceled, and this ability to have a dialogue between the interior space and the exterior space, I think is great, but it's got to be more than just visual. Like I think you actually have to be able to move back and forth in a way that's meaningful in some way.
Well, I think I don't think that the entrance 2 is the only way to get in for bicycles, so I think that there is some dynamic of bicycles that are crisscrossing the lobbies, and what's typically is happening in most buildings is bicycles are being relegated to the basement, which we're trying to avoid that here. So there's certainly, you could come in from the north and you could bring your bicycle in across and put it in its docking station for the day. And there's we haven't designed this yet of how big this coffee counter is. Are there fixed bar stools? Is there a back to this bar where an espresso machine is? That we still have to detail, and that's part of the development of the project as we develop the details of the lobby and all of the finite details. I think it's the zones of how it works. I think integrating the coffee into this space would be difficult to do, not impossible, but we felt that this was a good kind of central spot that is the intersection between people in the lobby that don't have bikes and people in the lobby that do have bikes, can all meet at the center of coffee.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there possible that any of the back of house, the dark gray, be slightly reconfigured to allow for more of the coffee counter integration? So perhaps part of that corridor becomes wider, that does incorporate the counter as Andrew was mentioning. I know that's
yeah,
tricky,
I'll be frank. It's really, really hard. We're already very, very stressed on viable loading to make a viable lab building. I think where we have that potential is in this zone of the lobby, where we can potentially look at this to try to enhance that component of the program. But making the dark gray stuff smaller is very, very challenging to the functionality.
Mark, I had a question. Hearing what everybody else is saying and trying to find a compromise as to some of these components between the outside landscape and what your bike room is it possible potentially within your design to open up the front of how like you're entering the bikes from where it says number 2, would it be possible potentially the facade of where the bikes are potentially to be able to open or be operable in some way that people can just come in potentially from the green space and like open up those 2 spaces so that you would be able to just not so much come in from a predictable path, but the idea that in like call it 6 months out of the year it could be open in which people can come in, and it creates more of a porous entry into the bike and people can like come in more thoroughly, and it activates it a little bit better so that the space is not confined to this corridor, but it opens up into the landscape, and it becomes a bigger space and allows people to circulate better without you having to eat into the gray area of the most necessary part of the lab, so that you don't touch that, but that you can open it up so that people can come in, they see it, they feel invited in, put their bikes, and they can circulate either outside through the lobby into the coffee area that you have.
Yeah, Frank, that we actually studied that of having kind of almost aircraft type doors that are hinged that open, or garage doors. What it does do, and it's something we can continue to study as we move further into the design. It does force us to put a door and containment of the HVAC system of the lobby itself. But that could be done via glass and
sure.
Glass doors.
Sure. Yeah.
But we're very, very cognizant of maintaining our LEED Platinum status and managing our energy consumption. So that's something that we could certainly study. It's an interesting idea because it does make it non-directional, as I think as you're describing.
All right, I don't want to cut off conversation, but I do want to point out that we have been talking about these 2 projects for just over An hour.
Talk about civic space for, yes. And I think that Mark is still waiting for us to comment on facade cladding and penthouse. So I think that
Yes.
it would be to Mark's advantage for us to also comment on that. I think that we feel very critical about the civic space, Mark, and I guess, you know, it's the pedestrian component, right? So it's so key, and I think we get involved, and I think it's such an exciting project. But you're here for two other pieces, so I would suggest that, Sarah, in lieu of time, can we move it to the two other pieces that Mark is here for?
Most definitely.
They both look great.
You know, Mark, the penthouse is always in labs. Penthouse is always like this, like afterthought, right? And it's like it's a de facto that we get. You know, it has to be there. It's 20 to 30 feet high. It has to exist. So I appreciate the idea that you are trying to articulate it and you are trying to do something with it that it makes it seem like it is the top of the building and not so much of a penthouse, and you are adding materiality to it and texture to it. So I would say that in that, I believe that your preferred shingled version has evolved, even though the bottom part does not belong to it, but the top part of the shingle does really begin to create an interesting articulation of what this penthouse would be. What is the bronze material of the cladding screening for this?
So this is a 3-coat painted aluminum plate material, and it's intended to have a bronze metallic finish.
Okay.
We're not using any Lucobond or composite just because of code flammability reasons.
Yeah, I think it's a successful reinterpretation of what the penthouse can be, Mark. I would definitely say that moving forward on this project, it's going to be a piece that I would say that we require to see in the mock-up when it's being done, so that we can actually look at the materiality and the aesthetic of it, so that we can approve it as well when you get to that. But I would say that, you know, I thank you for articulating the penthouse and trying to create something interesting versus an afterthought.
Well, I appreciate that, Frankie. I know you know how difficult it is to make all of this mechanical part of the structure. So we'll definitely do that.
And my question was going to be, what led you, as we're talking about the facade now, on the cladding on the facade, what led you from one to the other? I know that there was a preferred, and now you went to the second, you know, and there was a discussion about it. So what led you to just pursue the second one versus, you know, the preferred one that you had originally?
It's interesting. We went back and forth, and to be honest, we like both of those solutions. We think they're both really, really good. The vertical fold, we believe, is much more executable than the faceted one. And the faceted one becomes very difficult to bend metal in multiple directions, and you end up with a lot more seams and caulking. Whereas here, we think we can get much more monolithic and a continuous tonal result of the painting of the aluminum plate, which we think is going to yield a much more timeless looking composition of metal.
When looking at the image on the upper right, there's a thin plate that separates the floor. Yeah, what is the reality of that? What is the architectonics of that?
So that's a very good observation. So we're working through the details. We want the edge that you see to be as thin as we can possibly make it, but we know the top of this will ultimately have to slope up for water drainage and ultimately make it a little bit uncomfortable for birds to stand on, and because we want to avoid that. So that we're working through the details now, but the top of it will slope up But we think from this perspective of when looking at it from the ground, that you'll never perceive that. You'll only perceive the true horizontality of the bottom of it and the very thin face that is the vertical face.
How thick do you think that would end up being?
We're hoping on the face piece that is actually at the front, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6 inches.
6 inches.
And we're working through the structural tectonics of that now, Frank.
You know, what I would say is that I appreciate the toning down, just because one of the things that I hate is when people overpromise and underdeliver, and we find ourselves always in a situation in which we see these presentations of facades or ideas that we have to continuously come back and like, oh no, we wanted to do that, but then it got VE'd. So I would hope that as you're trying to control this, which I think I appreciate, and I think that it's more constructible and it's more feasible, that you stay true to the nature of what you're trying to achieve, so that it stays part of what you're presenting. Because I think that there's an elegance to it that, you know, I would like to see on a lab building that is very rarely seen when you see it from a distance. You know, a lot of times you see this monotonous repetition and all of these things are not interesting. So I would hope that it doesn't change in that. But I would say that I respect your tone down, and I appreciate keeping the details of certain components, and I hope that you continue to do that as you evolve it.
I appreciate that again, and you know, we're very fortunate that our client Greystar is very committed to as much vision glass as we can possibly get. So they're very in tuned and cognizant of the detailing, and so we're excited to execute what you see up on as close to what you see in the upper right hand as we can get, and it's all based on gravity is basically our only constraint now.
Is that it, Frank? Do you have any other comments?
Not for right now.
Okay, so I have a couple of comments. The first is on the penthouse. I think the development of that has, has been good. The shingle, the idea of the shingle. I think the success of it is going to have something to do with how much of a shingle return, how much of a return you get, so that you really, and maybe the angle of it, and so that it really is usable. Because I think if the detail is too timid, it's not going to look that much different from your smooth. So, I don't know what kind of return you're looking at and whether you're actually exaggerating that return in any way, but.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation too, and we actually increased the shingle dimension from the last time we saw you a few weeks ago. Currently, what's drawn right now is 10 inches. So this component return is 10 inches, which we think is going to yield in a significant shadow, which is really going to be very, very apparent.
Yeah, so I would detail it to make sure it's as, it really emphasizes even, returns at an angle or, a steeper angle or something, to really accomplish the delivery that it, or the grain that it gives us. And in terms of the facade, I liked this. I like School 2 better. I think it gives it an intermediate scale. The other one, I think they're intriguing. Both of these options are, but I felt like the number 3, created a really uniform pattern on it and didn't give it that intermediate scale. And so I really appreciate, what the scale that it's, the direction that it's taking. I agree with Frank about his comments about detailing it also. So my big question is, why the color? Why bronze in this context? For this kind of building, why bronze?
Oh, that's a really good question. We looked at a lot of grays. We looked at anodized, which kind of yields more of a silvery, and we felt that the building became less dynamic and less. It was lacking character, and so one of the things that I think is kind of part of this whole district is the nature of manufacturing, and bronze kind of represents craft and craftsmanship and all the dynamics that go with that, and so we felt it was a good material color that kind of is of the place of what this district was at one time, and so we wanted to honor that.
Yeah, because I guess my concern is thinking of the skyline here, is that it's going to affiliate with the casino. You know, so there's, so I'm questioning it a little bit, and I do think it's important that it is not a really dark color. So if you do continue with bronze, that it's like a middle bronze or even a light bronze, so we really see the faceting of the, of the shape. The shadows really play well on those. But again, I'm wondering if we're going to look at this and say, oh yeah, it's just like the casino over there in color. So solid bronze top, maybe that's a little golder, I don't know, but I can understand why you don't want to go in the gray, taking it in that direction. I appreciate that, but and I don't know, I would have some suggestions, but I think it's important that it makes sense, in a total way. So I do question the color.
So we'll explore. That's a really good comment, and we do not want it to look like the brown of Encore. We appreciate that comment, and so we will in the mock-up look at some really good full-size color samples, and we think that will have a significant differentiation, and it's not going to look like brown paint. That's the key, and that's what's on the other side of the river.
Right, and I think it would be good for us to see. I don't want to hold up, the decisions we make today with this, but that we see the colors, the final color palette before it gets, created as a mock-up, and there's some commitment to the colors. So that would be something I would propose. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Are we set to vote on this?
I think we are. I just wanted to check with Andrew to see if he had anything to add to the building conversation. But otherwise, I think we're ready for some motions.
I think Frank and Deborah covered it. I think we're good.
Okay. Then let's start with the building. Can I get a motion for the preferred schematic design scheme? Let's start with the, let's go top to bottom. Can I get a motion for the preferred scheme for the penthouse?
A motion for the preferred scheme for the penthouse.
Second.
All right, so as a clarification, that is the penthouse with the shingle option, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, roll call vote. Deborah?
Yes.
Frank?
Yes.
Andrew?
No. Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry. I just thought I'd give you guys all a heart attack.
All right, so that's unanimous for the shingle penthouse. We need a motion for the preferred cladding option of the vertical fold.
So moved, the vertical fold.
I second.
All right, roll call vote. Deborah?
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
All right, so we have unanimous vote on that. The general, is there a particular priority design guideline that you would like to accentuate, or do you feel that all the design guidelines have been met for the building design?
I mean, I think that we feel like the guidelines have been met. I think that, support my colleagues, I think that in what Mark has said, that they will continue to explore the bike room moving forward. And we don't need them to come back for that. And they're going to explore the materiality as it relates to the casino across the street in its relationship to the bronze. We would like to see materiality on that. I think that it's just, things that we would like to see moving forward as they continue to move forward. But we believe that they have met the design guidelines.
Okay, can I get a second on that motion?
So can I have one clarifying question
Yes.
So the requirements for the through block plaza, are we voting that in regards to the civic space or regards to the building itself? Is that one of the design guidelines we're voting on for this?
I say it falls on the civic space.
Yeah, that I think is civic space. So
Discuss
for
it on the civic space.
example, the guidelines regarding storefront, for example, would be part of the building list, but anything through block plaza would be civic space.
So, but the requirement for the through block plaza does specifically say, things about the building and the active uses against it. And for me, I don't feel like that the bike room meets that standard. So
Okay.
That's sort of my question is, it's not the plaza itself that is, it's the programming within the building that is the issue for me. So are we voting on, and either way, I just want to clear when I do the vote.
That is a very good question. I think what we can do is add perhaps there's a condition, part of the recommendation to the planning board, that it be conditioned for another look, not just materials. Normally what happens is the planning board will condition the materials, as Deborah had mentioned, sort of to get a material palette and then an on-site mock-up of the actual construction materials. So perhaps in this instance, we could.
I think that to Andrew's point, the condition as well would be that the programmatic development of that, which is what Mark was saying, that they would be willing to continue to explore in how that relates. So that's still an open item for a condition to still show whether it's going to open up to the plaza, whether it's going to incorporate so those components. So programmatic development per the comments from the committee.
All right, we can definitely add that to the recommendation and make sure the planning board is aware of that.
Because Mark, I would agree to the fact that the images that you show as precedents are really sexy.
And we just need to get there.
And you need to get sexy.
Understood.
All right.
All right, so let me clarify. So the motion I have right now is a motion that the guidelines have been met, but will continue, but the bike room programmatic element for active use and integration with the through block plaza still needs further investigation and perhaps should be conditioned as part of the planning board approval.
Yes, but they don't have to come back in front of us.
Right, okay, all right. So Frank, by your yes, I'm saying that you made that motion. Is that all right?
I motion yes.
Okay, can I get a second?
Seconded.
All right, roll call vote. Deborah,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
and Andrew.
Sorry, just to clarify, so if I vote yes, I'm saying that I think that the bike room is okay. We just need to develop it further and that it can work as this portion of the through block plaza. Is that right?
It will need to be explored further.
And if I vote no, they still get to move on, but I sort of register that I don't believe the bike room, even in development, is an active use. Is that correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Then I vote no.
So noted. Okay, are there, and we've already discussed the other piece that we needed to add, if there were any design modifications, and I believe we've talked about those in this last motion regarding the bike room. So with that, Louisa, do you want to take it over and talk about the civic space?
Sure, I would be happy to. Okay, so do we have a motion that the civic space meets the design guidelines for the through block plaza that I read earlier this evening? Someone's got to make the motion.
I motion that the civic spaces through block plaza that.
Do I have a second? Frank seconds. Roll call vote. Deborah,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Andrew,
So just the civic space, so yes, sorry.
and then secondly, do we have a motion to recommend the commission's additional advice and recommendations concerning the satisfaction of the design guidelines for the through block plaza and the proposed offsite improvements?
I can't repeat that.
But you can make a motion.
I make a motion towards what Louisa said.
Second.
I third.
Okay, so roll call. Deborah,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
and Andrew.
And are we able to see the sort of feedback? I know the loop, the feedback is going into there. Can we see that before it moves on to the planning board?
You can request it. Yes.
Yes, just say yes.
Yes.
So we provided feedback on the design to move forward, which the team will incorporate and move forward to move on the project. I'm just asking if we get to see that list of feedback as it moves toward the planning board.
We can ask for what the presentation to the planning board is to see. I think we can do that.
That would be
Yeah,
great.
I think you can do that, and we can make sure that I can make sure that does get coordinated and forwarded with you as part of the planning board meeting.
That would be
Yeah,
great.
it would be nice to see that actually as this goes to the planning board.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, you have made a motion to recommend the commission's additional advice to go to the planning board, but you want to add a condition that you get to see the presentation that will be given to the planning board?
Just like to see the advice, honestly. That would be great.
Yeah, we would like to see development. Yes. To be copied on it.
Okay, so specifically, what does that mean when you say you would like to see development? You would like to see the revised?
Well,
You
obviously,
don't want them to appear before the board again, before the
we don't.
committee again. Is that what you're asking for?
No. So we're sending the forward to the planning board with the caveat that they need to respond to some of the specific items that we listed tonight. And what we're asking for is to see that specific item list.
I think that what Andrew is saying is basically he would like to see it. If he feels that's something that he or the committee express to be modified, developed was not there, one of the members could actually show up to the planning board meeting and say, hey, what happened?
Or just add something to the list too. I've got things to do.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, so the motion is to recommend that this project move forward, but that what we talked about here be shared with this committee before it goes to the planning board.
Correct.
Is
I motion
someone,
that.
okay, so Andrew makes a motion for that. Second?
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. Frank?
Yes.
Deborah?
Yes.
And Andrew?
Yes.
And then you, in terms of the civic space, you will also again be meeting with us again. And we really do appreciate the different moves that you all have made to make this a better public space. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank
I think the kind of comments we got today were very helpful. And I think there are really kind of pieces that we can, as we evolve the design, I think the big pieces are in place. So I appreciate the commission's moving this forward for us.
Yeah, I second that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mickey. And thank you, Mark.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Okay, all right, thank you all.
Anthony,
Andrew.
you can drop.
Andrew, what is next on our agenda, please?
599 Somerville Ave.
So far for like 20 minutes, huh?
So can I make a clarification regarding the presentation? So the applicant gets 20 minutes and then the commission can discuss. But they
I
get
know,
a 20.
I know. Where are the bad people? I'm saying, where are the bad
Would it be
people at this
helpful
point?
if I showed some sort of timer, like when it was like 10 or 5 minutes or something on
Yes,
screen?
absolutely.
You need to keep us
do
on
that.
track. Totally, keep us on track, Andrew, because it's like, we're bad. We can keep talking
You should,
all day long.
Andrew, please jump in when the applicant has their last 5 minutes, and please jump in when we should be wrapping up as well. That's
I'll
super
make
important.
I say that, you know, at most, I think at most, we should each get 10 minutes if it's gonna be 3 of us, so that it's half an hour at most. But, you know, if we can keep it quicker, I think it's better for
Okay.
us.
Yeah, I
I
won't
know
be
we're
until
passionate.
All right, I will do that. And then for those who are presenting for the Somerville Ave project, can you please raise your hands?
Also, is Tim coming back at some point?
Tim should be coming back. I don't know. I thought he was listening in, so. He's there. I see him.
Hello, everyone. I'm back.
There's Tim. He's back. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you all see my screen? Just
Yep.
check. Okay, great.
Yep, we can.
All right, super.
And Russell, are you with the developer or are you with the architecture firm?
I'm working with the developer.
Okay.
I think we're just waiting on Rob Elfer from Studio Troika, who's the architect. Rob, if you can hear us, just raise your hand and they'll elevate you to a presenter. Just got a text from Rob saying he couldn't get in.
Yeah, I see him
What's the
on the
gentleman's name
agenda.
again?
Rob Elfer.
Okay, I see him.
There we go. Thank you. Great. Hi, Rob. There we go. We've got everyone on our team now. Thank you. You want us to dive in or should we wait for, I'm not sure what the protocol here is.
Dive in.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Russell Preston. I'm with Principal Group and we're working with Raffi Properties on the project here at 599 Somerville Avenue. We're really thrilled here to be here tonight with you all. I'm going to give a little bit of a kind of urban design framing and kind of some introduction around the project and why we're building here at 599 Somerville Avenue. And then I'm going to hand it off to Rob Elfer from Studio Troika and then to Nina Chase to talk about the building and the landscape. So Raffi Properties, it owns, develops, manages, and invests in mixed-use residential commercial real estate in Somerville, the greater Boston area, and Hong Kong. And it's really been focused on a kind of community approach to development here in Somerville. This started in 2018 with the acquisition of what's now known as Summer Nova. And we've really learned a lot working with the community there at Summer Nova and getting to know the neighborhood here, Summer Nova, Spring Hill, Union Square, and understanding this kind of robust innovation around the businesses that are working here, and learned very quickly that folks were growing their companies and adding jobs here to Somerville very quickly, even through the pandemic. And in late 2019, early 2020, acquired the 599 Somerville Avenue building to really build a neighborhood-scaled, lab-ready commercial building to help some of these tough tech tenants grow and stay within Somerville. So, we really recognize that there's kind of an ecosystem here in the neighborhood and the this greater part of the city. And we also recognize that ecosystem has to exist within the culture of this place. So we've really worked hard, finding partners in the community, such as Catherine here, and working from everything from public art to placemaking and programming. And we want to extend that kind of approach here to Somerville Avenue at 599, thinking about that Main Street corridor. So we've assembled a really robust team for a project of this scale to really think about how to do a great MR3 building here. And as I said, Rob will take over in a little bit and then need to talk about landscape. It's a fairly straightforward commercial building type, in the MR3 district. We're really looking to make this project entirely conform and kind of fit into the context of this place here on Somerville Avenue. The neighborhood is interesting because it's kind of, situated between Porter and Union Square. There's a lot of sort of post-industrial uses, a lot of industrial uses that are still there, a lot of sort of mix of different building and residential building types. And then it's really only about a 5-7 minute walk over to Summer Nova. So we do have this sort of larger ecosystem of opportunity here with some of the businesses that want to remain close to not just SummerNova, but also Greentown Labs. And when you look at the kind of zooming in with the 599 site here, we really think this is a transit-rich neighborhood, and recognizing that Somerville Avenue is this kind of spine running through the city here, and that we're really only 300 feet from the transit-centric corridor. And then also, it's a vibrant community, and we recognize that there's a lot of activities that happen in the neighborhood. And when we look at the site in particular, it really is almost 200 feet of essentially dead ground level and dead active ground floors. So we're really hoping that this can help fill in that missing piece of the main street here along Somerville Avenue and kind of contribute to the overall vibrancy of this area of the corridor. And in discussions we've had with the community and some of the neighbors over the last several months, this focus on the character of Somerville Avenue and thinking about it as a corridor of very sort of unique building types and how those building types can be enhanced when redevelopment occurs along the corridor has been an important discussion we've had with them. So we've analyzed kind of the blocks along Somerville Avenue and really started to understand the rhythm of the street, how buildings meet the corner, the sort of gap and spacing between bays, to kind of understand how we can make sure that an MR3 building can situate itself well within the context of the street. And I think another important urban design element of this is the kind of character along Somerville Avenue, in that kind of Main Street mixed use corridor, but then also the relationship that we have as it transitions to the residential building types kind of up the hill along Spring Street and then on Pittman behind the site. And really having to kind of make that transition very seamless and comfortable between the kind of mixed use corridor and this sort of more residential scale. So the site in particular, and what we've asked Rob's team and Nina's team to really look at is how the site can respond to the corner in the top right of Spring and Somerville Avenue and really celebrate that corner as kind of a important junction in the overall rhythm of the street, as other larger buildings do along the corridor. And then looking at Kent Street, this is the photo on the bottom left, really representing that relationship to the cross street and that view that we get with this terminated vista. And then the overall kind of general mix of different building types and really starting to look at how this building can start to respond to what's good about this corridor and then represent kind of the future quality that we're hoping can be achieved. Some of the zoning elements, and I know you've all seen this already, but we're really trying to make this a conforming building, both with the massing, the height, particularly with the setbacks, and so really understanding how a neighborhood-oriented kind of commercial building can be lab-ready and made work in a context such as of this. So working with the corner here and really setting back to produce those wider sidewalks, both on Somerville Avenue and along Spring Street, and then kind of thinking about how to situate the building in this sort of odd-shaped lot. And then looking at the permeable area requirements, really thinking about how we can transition using landscape between the two contexts, both Somerville Avenue and the residential neighborhood behind. And then when we started to mass up the building and think about the building, the puzzle around how do you really at the width of this building start to break it down, not just in scale but also in facade. And I think Rob's gonna really excited about the designs that Rob and the team have come up with. And I think just the sort of idea that this is a building that needs to sort of fit into the larger commercial ecosystem and all of the sort of companies that are innovating around this area of the city. And ideally, this is something that really contributes to the neighborhood at a scale that is appropriate for Somerville Avenue and also is functional for the types of buildings that we want to stay in Somerville. So I'm going to hand it off to Rob now, and he can take us through kind of where we're at to date and with the design.
Great, thanks, Russ. Good evening, everyone. So I think the slide you're looking at right now is the massing diagram we looked at with the neighborhood meeting #1. And I just want you to, one of the things we took away from that meeting is the site is a very sensitive site, and we're very conscious of the decisions that we're making relative to the neighborhood behind it. Somerville Ave has its own character and context, but we understand how this is getting knitted into a really tight community. So one of the things you'll see a little bit later on that we've done is taken another step is that actually if you make that slide transition really quickly, you'll see it really quickly because that was pretty cool. You can sort of see the way we pull the right-hand corner away from the two buildings on the right-hand side. We had a little bit of an overhang. So we pulled, skinnied the front of the building up a little bit, and actually that L that cuts back, we actually pulled that back. So kind of like that motion transfer thing, like the movie's there for a second, but you can start to see how we started to adapt it to the next phase. So these diagrams, and this is new a little bit to us to run through the UDC guidelines and how the presentations go. So I won't get too deep into this because I know we only have a few minutes, so I'll be brief on this. But these diagrams are showing, the first one is the structural bay and the integrity of that coming out the facade. That's that first diagram. The second diagram is looking at the facade composition, the percentage of glazing on the upper floors, the higher percentage of glazing on the lower floor. This is looking at the depth of relief that we're looking at, so it's not a flat facade. I'll point out really quickly that we really took to task this idea of trying to design a building that really feels like two different buildings, which is not an easy task, frankly. So I think it's something that we'll start to see in these diagrams, how we start to work in that. So if you jump to the next slide, you can start to look at how we're dealing with a distinct base on it, different colors, different materials, different scale of the windows and the fenestration, more of a commercial feeling to it, but how it ties to the proportion of the elements above. You jump slides quickly. This is where we're showing entries at every 30 feet on the facade on Somerville Avenue. This shows the integration for more of a commercial use for retail of canopies. There's a slightly more distinct one towards the corner, which we sort of feel is the focus of the entry of the building, of the main building itself. And jump through to the next one. And this one starts to look at the different materiality and the detailing that we're looking at this at. We're only at an SD phase, but to really make this work, we really kind of dug deep into the design and the detailings on this. So this gives you a sort of a first pass on materials and scaling. So this slide just kind of brings that all together, and I guess we're looking for questions later, so I'll kind of move along. So if you take that back into the context of actual design of a building, you'll start to see from that last diagram, this is the view that we're looking at for Somerville Ave and Spring Street. One of the things we did is we actually did a point cloud scan of the entire neighborhood. We really wanted to understand how this building really fits with these buildings, and we have views from every direction. So the image you're seeing in the background with our image is a Revit model in the point cloud scan, so they're incredibly accurate. So this building starts to look at that view from the primary view for Somerville and Spring Street, looking at the two distinct buildings. We jump to the next one quickly. This is looking at the west, so this is looking down across. The building has a party wall, a firewall to, the neighbor who would develop something. So that has to be fireproof material, but we're looking at Summer Nova really has some really cool artwork they put on the building. So the idea is for the time being to work with some local artists to put in a piece of art on that side of it. And we jump slides quickly. This is the termination vista, termination vista. I have a hard time with that word tonight. We really focused that one building to be dead center on Kent Street, and that's actually the primary entrance for the building as well. So from the urban design guidelines, that became a key piece to us, how we broke up the building. We jump to the next. And these slides start to get a little bit of interesting. This is where we start to really try to understand the scale of this building and the sensitivity to the neighbors. There's some really different size and small houses in the corner. It's a tightly knit community. So you start to see how this ties into those buildings, less of a focus on just Somerville Ave, but really starting to think about how we connect to those other buildings. And the interesting to note is the street starts to rise up. So when Somerville Ave, where it's all flat, this is starting to rise up all the way up to Spring Hill. So I think if you start to see that in the next slide, you just jump to it. So this is a sort of a bird's eye view of the building. Now you start to see its context of everything starting to rise up behind it. And I think you get it best in even the next slide. So in this slide, you start to really see how the building as two different elements really starts to fit, or we really tried to make it fit into this larger fabric of this area of Somerville. And we weren't trying to make it look like it goes away. We just found that it actually really works well with those other elements in that area. So then we jump to the next slide, so conscious of time. So in terms of material choices, and some of these materials spread across multiple facade options, but the primary materials we're looking at is a dark gray brick, a red brick, a material called Kupaclad, which is actually a natural slate material. We've used on a few buildings, a really beautiful, timeless material, a light gray brick, some form of a perforated metal accent piece, but we'd love it to have some kind of detailing that becomes really unique and ties back to Somerville. Right now, we're just showing that as a concept, and then a dark granite base. And you start to see how these tie into the different elements in the two buildings. We've really tried to make them look like two buildings, but have them work together and speak to each other. So not trying to be too Disney about it, really trying to make something that feels like it belongs together, but they're two distinct buildings. And then the windows we were looking at would just be a simpler sort of punched window trim with a little bit of a metal accent coming out around it. That's in the punched window element. I think if you jump to the next slide, so that's facade option 1. So this is the facade option 1 on Somerville Ave. I think the one thing I also want to point out is that we did spend some time really thinking about the penthouses. Our earlier studies sort of showed a continuous penthouse, and that just killed the design. So I think kind of like in the last conversation we had, we really started to focus on what are the detailing of the two different pieces. So you start to see how that blends with this building. I think you go to the next slide. This is a view from Somerville Ave going to Spring Street. And you start to really feel the activation of the street front. We really tried to bring that scale of some of the other commercial street fronts or storefronts and the adjacent buildings and a little farther down to this building. And Nina will talk about this sort of the ideas of how we're sort of integrating the landscaping into this, but we really like the idea of the sort of parklet element to the front of the building to activate that corner. This starts to be the view as we sort of switch to the side on Spring Street. And we wanted to bring it to your attention because I think it's an important part of it. We shouldn't just be only focusing on Somerville Ave. So we did a lot of work, as we said, as sort of push-pull in this, and to really have that second building kind of wrap itself back around the back of it. So in all the three schemes you'll look at, that's a little bit of a common theme of how do we do this and how do we bring it around. So that's option 1. So option 2 takes a slightly different approach. There's really kind of a desire to have a functional, tough building in this. It's not trying to be too pretty. So this scheme took a little bit more, a slightly more traditional, actually pretty much more traditional industrial building approach. So you start to see the different scales of the windows, more of that factory type fenestration, the breakdown of the piers, everything that becomes a little bit more pronounced, feeling a little bit heavier as a building. And then I think if you flip to the side view, the one thing we did differently here is we wanted to explore the idea of this building as being a little bit more like a flat iron corner. So the other building sort of wraps around and peaks out to the front of it. Just a different approach. This could just as well wrap around. We just wanted to look at something different. And you start to see how the windows, they start to break down here, so the scale gets smaller as we approach the residential side. That happened on the last scheme as well, I just admitted that. Let me flip one more. So this is the third scheme, which kind of harkens back a little bit to that turn of the century metal light buildings when we first started to use metal. So it's more of a flat stucco type design. It wouldn't actually be stucco, but it's less of a brick look and more almost like a Brooklyn Soho type feeling to it. Slightly different proportions of windows, different scaling on both sides of it. Again, in all these schemes, we're taking a different look at the penthouses. The ground floor becomes somewhat similar, but sort of different materials and touches on the canopy elements. Let me jump to the next one. Again, so this is that wrapping around where we have, again, a little bit of that flat iron approach. And also in a few slides later, we'll start to talk about this a little bit, but getting the loading docks for a lab building and the underground parking into the site has been a real challenge. So what we've done is we really pushed those far away from the main street. So what you're seeing in the background on the left-hand side is actually the loading docks. The right-hand side, you kind of go down a ramp. There's a wall that protects it from the neighborhood. So that gets really pushed farther back. And then I think the next slide really just shows all three schemes in context. So I think the nice thing about it is that I think we do achieve this two building look in each one of these schemes with these different styles and aesthetics. The next slide, moving on, starts to show the relationship of the building to the site, which we haven't really touched with you so far. So in the right-hand corner, we really have the primary lobby to the building. Vertical circulation is in the corner. We've had to locate the transformer, has been tricky, but we've been able to tuck it away into that portion of the site. There is really no other location for it. But we have the loading dock, as you see, pulls way back into the site, about halfway into the building. And you see a sort of a curvilinear road and then the ramp down into the garage. And then the tenant spaces, which could be multiple tenants, could be on the left-hand side of that ground floor space. We jump the slide. So these are just a little bit closer look at the ground floor. I think we tried to sort of show it as a fairly active storefront. It could be a lot of different tenants. It could be one tenant, but I think the idea is to really break it up and break the scale down of all of these sort of storefront elements. So this is a sort of an enlarged view. You also start to see that, you just go back to the other one, there's a lot of detail in these slides that doesn't appear on a small screen, but I think you guys have the actual printout. So there's been a lot of thought into actual detailing and how do we start to use masonry buildings in a really real way, but maybe kind of a cool way in sort of some of the detailings that is a little bit more today. And then I think if you flip to the next slide, you'll start to see the same thing on the right-hand side of that scheme. The right-hand side of the building, we didn't really talk about it that much, but it's really looking at more of a thin metal detailing that comes up, breaks out of the plane, and starts to divide that. So as a contrast to the left-hand side. And I think we flip to the next slide. This is scheme option 2, so just looking at a larger ground floor context. And then I think the same thing for option 3.
Just as a quick heads up, Rob, you're at the 20-minute mark.
Oh, I talked too much. I'm sorry. I'm going to pass it to Nina really quick. She's really nice, so we want to listen to it.
Thanks, Rob. We could go through these existing conditions photos pretty quickly, but just to give you a sense of the character of the streetscape, these are showing surrounding the existing property and the abutting properties and a little bit of the grade change between the residential properties to the north and then our site as well. But here we have the site plan, and I'll go through this relatively quickly, but essentially there are 2 major parts: the streetscape along Somerville Avenue, turning the corner of Spring Street, and then a landscape buffer and accessible egress path to the north of the project. For the streetscape, we're looking at relocating a bus shelter. We're keeping the existing curb line for most of the project here until you get to the corner of Spring Street and Somerville Ave, and looking to expand that area to provide a little more breathing room at that corner, but then also potential proposed parklet that you're seeing in some of the renderings. The streetscape is a split between 6 feet of accessible walk and 6-foot furnishing zone, and meets the Somerville zoning code. And we have in there in the furnishing zone street trees, bike racks, benches, and then a precast. And that kind of wraps up along Spring Street as well, with a tree pit there on the corner. And then as you go to the back of the site, we do have a planting buffer with trees, shrubs, perennials, and grasses that's 6 feet wide, and then 4-foot accessible egress with permeable paving. We've also integrated a privacy fence at the property line. And then in this plan, you can see on the top left-hand corner, we do have an extensive green roof on this corner that's on the second floor here. We are exceeding the green score. The required green score is 0.25. We have a 0.31. The ideal green score is 0.3. And so with the buffer in the back and the green roof, we are exceeding that. And then we do have some precedent imagery, some images on the top, and then neighborhood character images. I can go into these if you have questions. I know we're limited on time. And then the next slides are showing some precedent images related to streetscape, and then kind of the quality of the planting, density of planting on that northern buffer. The next slide is also showing the parklet precedents. Right now there's kind of a placeholder in the renderings, but as the facade develops and the option is selected, working very closely with Rob and his team to develop something that's really in tandem with the architectural character of the building, and extending that out onto the street for this parklet to provide a little more pedestrian activity and space on that corner. And then we also have a preliminary planting list here, and happy to answer any questions related to this as well.
Great, and you know, Thanks all. I know we've gone over time a little bit, but I think a component of this is kind of how we can start to mix in the art and really thinking about how the building can have another layer and dimension to it while working with some of the talented folks from around the region on some of the art that might adorn the building. So thanks everyone. We'll stop there and we can dive into discussion.
If I could start. I think that what I would say, Russell and Nina, is that though I appreciate the intent of the imagery that you show of public art and approaches to the landscape on the streets and the imagery of what it could be, I think that I would rather see what you are actually proposing rather than precedents. I think that there's a big stretch between this is things that we like versus what is being proposed. So one of the things that I would like to understand moving forward is this is the art that we like, or these are the areas where art can happen, and this is the wall where this is the space for art, as well as if you are intending to do materiality and components of landscape within the street of Somerville Avenue, what those are exactly, specifically. This is what the street proposal is. This is what the bus station can be, or this is what, all of these components are. I think that though I do appreciate the precedent and they're very enticing imagery, I think that I would like to hear more of what you're designing and what's being proposed so that we can then provide our criticism onto that component, not the theoretical potentials of what can exist, but more of what you are putting in there in that sense.
Sure. I don't know if it's worth pulling up the site plan, or Russell, if you want to comment on that.
You all can still see my screen, right? Just to...
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
Frank, I think that's a valid comment. We're really at a schematic level, so I'd love to hear your input on the landscape and the building before. If you want to talk about the art, that's great. The building looks
no, I mean, I can't tell you what you should design. I think I would like to see what you can propose. And though I understand that you're at a schematic level, I would like to get some of the ideas of that moving forward so that we get excited about some of those components, right? As you move forward. I mean, I think that, Nina is a talented landscape architect, and I think that I would like to see some of those pieces being incorporated, developed so that we can criticize that component of it. I mean, I think that when I am not a landscape architect, I would let Andrew focus on that, in more detail. But when, we tend to see these things, we tend to see little strips in the back of landscape, that's the buffer that separates the property from the back to the front. And I got excited about what you were proposing on the front, but I would like to see what your proposal is for those pieces that you go back one. I mean, I think that you had some labels there. It's, you have like some
the site plan there.
Yeah, you have some proposed parkland elements. You have some proposed benches, proposed bicycle racks. I mean, to see those not so much in a plan base, but more of in either elevation or a 3D base, I think would be very helpful.
Okay, yeah. So at this stage, we, we're showing indication of materials in the plan and showing locations. So for all the elements in the furnishing zone, showing where the bus shelter would be, where the bike racks would be, lighting, trees, benches, indication that the concrete unit pavers in here would be a gray color with some sort of parklet element in more of a wood, or potentially some sort of masonry to match some of the architectural elements. I would say we're not at that stage yet, but we're happy to continue to develop that and give a little more detail there.
And I think it's also worth mentioning, we've really sort of thought a lot about that corner since the first community meeting. And, one of the questions I really want to get into in the discussion with the folks in the next community meeting is really what kind of activities do they want to see? What kind of public life do they think happens at that corner? And kind of recognizing that parklet needs to respond to what the neighborhood might want to do there. And it could be as simple as a nice area to sit down. I think we want to have that kind of co-design with them in the process, and be sure that the design that Nina in her office develops moving into the planning board is successful at kind of achieving what I think the neighborhood would like to do there. So I think that's why we've been hesitant to really dive into a lot of detail on that parklet, knowing that we've got a talented team of designers and wanting to have some further dialogue as the process marches on with the community, so it kind of has a real genuine feel to the Spring Hill neighborhood. Does that make sense?
I have a question. Nina,
Sure,
hi,
sure. Yeah, no, sure, but it is important.
Hi.
Hi, Louisa.
Hi. Have you been working with someone on the public space and urban forestry team?
We had, Russell, you had connected, but we haven't been working with someone directly.
Okay, so I think.
We'd love to work with someone on that, Louisa.
Here we are.
We had a kickoff, and I think we need a few more discussions.
Yeah, so we should set up a meeting with Andrew Lowe.
Okay.
I don't know if you spoke to him when doing your green score, but I think there is some guidance we can provide on a number of things before you get too far ahead.
Sounds good.
And Robert, I had one question from your presentation on it. This is a proposed lab building, correct?
Yes, typical lab building, but it could be, as Russ was describing, Tough Tech, which are these companies that are working in Greentown Lab and Summer Nova that would be able to translate to this space.
When you're proposing the penthouse, what are we talking about for the penthouse height of this proposed lab building? I mean, typically, my lab buildings have 25 feet, 30 feet penthouses, right? For wet labs and any type of lab space. So my question is to you, as I look at these renderings, what are we talking about for a penthouse from a height perspective in your renderings?
Sure, so I can speak to that. So what we did is we put in a educated placeholder guess of 16 feet above the roof level is what you're seeing. Now that's based on a schematic layout and material selection for unit selection for all the various rooftop components. And we are actually pretty close to knowing what we're doing on that. We're also working with the Centec right now. They've done the background noise studies, and we're working with, they're not quite there in confirming the height, but we feel that it's going to be in that ballpark right now.
So so I have a question. So if I were to say that we would approve this at 16 feet penthouse, how would you feel about that? Would you say, yes, we will stay to 16 feet?
I think that's what we're aiming to do. We need the confirmation from Centec. I think the biggest driver in the back is going to be the height relative to the sound criteria that they have to meet. So that's obviously going to be the biggest driver on that side of it. But yeah, that's pretty close to that's pretty much what we're aiming for right now. We don't think we're going to have to go taller right now.
I will put that as a condition for you, Robert, moving forward. The idea that you're saying 16 feet is going to be your penthouse, I'm going to hold you to it. That seems to be like reasonable. My penthouses are never 16 feet, and I think Tim is shaking his head because he knows that. My penthouses are 25 feet at a minimum, which would mean that your building would be 67 feet, tall.
No,
so
most of this, Frank, most of this is really a sound wall rather than a penthouse. So there's a component of it that will have some of the penthouse of it, but a fair amount of this is really sound wall. But we're working very closely with the engineering team we understand that the height is a big issue. And we knew that from the get-go, and that's a lot of the feedback we had from the first community meeting. So we're very serious trying to make it as low as possible.
So if I can just jump
in.
in
The
with
last question. Go, Tim, go.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
No, go, Tim, go.
Just jumping in with a question on that. Do you know at this point how much of the space behind the wall is enclosed penthouse versus just open mechanical well?
Oh, yeah, I don't know the exact percentage. I want to say it's probably about 20% or 25% maybe enclosed, and the rest of it is open. That's planning for base building functions and future tenant shafts and equipment that we would have. So we've actually tried to plan all that out as much as possible. As I said, we're in early schematic design yet, but we've had the engineers take a very, very close look at this. We knew this would be one of the driving conversation points.
I don't want to, sort of, I know that's an issue, and I get to Frank's point about the massing and the height, but I don't want us to get lost on the facade options and the schemes that we're supposed to be reviewing and talking about this evening. So.
No, by no means, Sarah. Just we're going on the difficult parts. I think that the building is elegant. I think that the facades are, the approach that they're doing is elegant in a lot of components, and I like the way that they break down into two buildings. And if I were to say, of a preferred scheme, I can definitely support, option one as an option that I think that is heading in a particular interesting direction. In my mind, I'm just asking for the other components that a building of this nature also bring to its nature in an urban component, which are obviously the penthouse, which impacts the massing of the building, and parking as well, which impacts also the massing of the building. How parking happens in the building. This is a building that's going to require parking, so it has to resolve that in some way or fashion. So my next question was going to be, in the requirements that the city has and the zoning has, what are the parking? How is this the building complying with its parking requirements?
I think we have that slide in the appendix, right?
I don't
Actually
know if we
took
have
that
parking
out of the primary presentation because we went through the design guidelines that requested for this. That didn't seem to be a major part of it. But what's happening is the ramp that you're seeing, I'll talk through it right now. The ramp you're seeing right now brings you down, and the parking is essentially under. Do we not have that slide somewhere?
No, Rob, I don't think we have a parking plan.
In the appendix, though? Thought we had one still in there. So yeah, we talked about the parking. We're meeting the parking requirements, and everything is in that lower level underneath the main building.
So you have a whole level below grade for parking.
You have a whole level below grade, and it's been a challenge to get the loading dock and the ramp situated in such a way that it wasn't interfering with the street. So pulling everything back into the center of the site, pulling people away, we've studied all the turning radiuses on trucks, and everything goes down there. So I apologize that we don't have that plan here, but yes, the entire underground of the building is currently parking.
And bike parking
requirements. And bike, that was one of the big questions and concerns from the community meetings, was having a lot of bike racks and a lot of bike storage. So there's considerable bike storage down there, as well as we're trying to make that a function. They're really looking for it more on the street front, so we're trying to incorporate that as well, which Nina was showing some images of. And we'd like to make it bike racks.
Just understanding how people get around this part of the neighborhood has been a really important aspect to us, and recognizing, I ride my bike over there all the time, so it's sort of firsthand where we have good visitor parking along the street, real good access to elevator down to a good bike room, kind of trying to give as much preferential treatment with the site constraints that we have to that bicycle mobility. So that, that's been integrated into the thinking.
So I'd like to change the conversation to the facade alternatives. And this is what we need to vote on this tonight, correct? Or this is something that we may want to vote on. And I feel like the one that's most successful is creating a unified block, but one that has distinct parts to it is actually option 3. And then I'm wondering if that has to do with the coloration of it. I feel like the other two are just different, I don't perceive of a reason why they're as different as they are materially. And so I prefer option 3 in terms of, I think the other thing I guess I'm responding to is the depth I see in the facade. I don't think, so I think it would be good if, if you did proceed with option 3, that, the detailing of this is contemporary. It takes, it does create the kinds of depths that you're talking about here, but, not with traditional cornice elements and things like that, but something that is more interpretive. And the essence of this is a deep facade. So I feel like that presents something, and again, the color might be playing into this to some extent. That is the most successful combination or attempt to make something that breaks down into two, but still is is coherent as a single thing.
We did have, actually, it's interesting you say that, because at one point we did have option one with those colors on it, and I know what you mean. That was, this option one created a starker contrast on it, but we all also in our team did like option three. Not necessarily agree with you in terms of the detailing on it, but there's something about the proportion, the depth, and the coloring, probably most specifically the coloring, which was really appealing.
Yeah, I find that very appealing.
It's almost like if you did the dark brick light on option one, that you would have that, or vice versa, you would have that kind of language working, and that could work pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, Deborah, there was something I found compelling about scheme 3, and I think you identified it, the materiality, that there's something tying the two sides together, because ultimately this is one building. I think ultimately my preference was for scheme 1. I liked the kind of vertical scale of one building versus the other with the simple punched window. And I think what also felt right about this is it wasn't expressing the larger structural bay, the every 3 windows. It's just the every window bay, which seemed to feel more appropriate for a neighborhood scale commercial building, which is how this one was described. But there were things I liked about both 2 and 3, and I think you identified the one for 3 was a similarity in materiality. In scheme 2, there was some variation in the window pattern at the corner. Yeah, so there's one window that's just slightly larger at the corner. It seems to be recognizing the fact that the corner is something different on the building. It's not just the repetition of the same thing. And I wonder if there's the possibility to carry that idea through whichever one of the 3 options we end up settling on. And so I really appreciate the overall aspiration to create a neighborhood scale commercial building. When you said that, I immediately started thinking about the programming of the building. I think more broadly, the dynamic we've seen in Somerville a lot is kind of these smaller commercial spaces going away, being replaced with residential. We have new, larger scale commercial development, but the aspiration to create a building for these mid-size or smaller companies is great. I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe how you're planning the layout of the upper stories of the building, because I think it impacts how we think about the facade in a couple of ways. It's a relatively narrow site, so it seems like it's probably not going to be a center core building. So are there core elements kind of facing out on the exterior?
Yeah, so I could speak to that, and I guess we don't have that slide, but what's happening is, the front core, because it is think of it as essentially an L-shaped building. So what we're doing is the core on the front of it is going to bring you up to every floor. It's thought of as it's really being designed for a single tenant per floor. It's not a huge footprint. And for these type of spaces and clients, that's about what they're looking for, if not larger. It's pretty much whatever we can get onto the site. So the structure of the building is you come up on the right-hand corner on the upper floors. The front of the building is skewed towards the office side, and then the middle and the back L is skewed towards the lab side. The freight elevators and the core elements that you see in the center of it would lead you to a lab corridor on that middle piece that would separate for the office from the lab side. So you kind of want to separate those two out. So it works pretty nicely for a typical lab floor, actually.
And I think
it's a tight site and a challenging site, as you can tell. So.
And we've been really cognizant of thinking about the lab, towards the rear of the floor plate to understand, smaller windows, have a little bit more liberty with how the windows are placed on that facade. So they're, responding to windows placed on the rear of the abutting building. So we really don't minimize any privacy concerns that we can with that rear facade. So I think the programming is kind of has been laid out and informed a lot by the context of the building.
I think that's good to hear, and that's one of the directions I was going in, is wondering about differences between the southern facade along Somerville Ave and the northern facade facing the neighbors. I think for future presentations, perhaps overall elevations of the building, including those facades, would just be helpful to review as well. But I think the aspiration and how you describe creating smaller windows on that side, addressing privacy concerns as well is great. One other question I had was about the division between the building into two parts. And again, thinking about the programming of the building, I was looking at your ground floor plan and seeing that there's this ground floor tenant space that actually expands across the two sides, and that covers basically the entire storefront of one side, and then one bay, and actually the demising wall between the lobby. It looks like it's perhaps on the middle of a storefront bay there. But I'm wondering how you settled on two equal pieces for the building, and whether one of the things you explored was pushing that separation line between the two building facades one direction or the other.
So this been a very literal interpretation of the zoning guidelines. It's new to us, so we had a pretty deep dive into it, and that's in the zoning guidelines, requires a 100-foot break. So that actually pretty much dictated where that break could go. I think you go back to the zoning slides, Russ. We'd love to deviate from it, but that is what it was. Yeah, I think you go one down where we talk about it. One of the slides mentioned, I can't see it on my screen right now, but the idea is that you actually had the building have to. Where is the number that we had on it?
So Robert, there's nothing saying that the building has to be equal in like the break. It could actually be, as Tim is saying, the interpretation of like that break is really to create two buildings.
Sure.
It doesn't need necessarily to break. It's to break the length of something that is X greater than 100 or whatever. The break doesn't need necessarily to happen exactly at that. So it could be on equal parts.
Well,
you know.
Sorry to interrupt, Frank, but two other elements to, and maybe Rob was going to get there, but I think looking at the overall corridor and how there are some larger buildings that anchor the corners along Somerville Avenue. So like kind of looking at the types of bays that they have and the rhythm of those bays started to inform the kind of length, the kind of the facade width of it, and kind of dealing with this issue of, how do you respond to that request in the zoning, but not necessarily produce a building that feels faux. I think really wanting to make sure that those were scaled to fit into that overall context. So as you're walking or kind of moving along Somerville Avenue, there's a repetition that is consistent, and that was part of it. And then also, looking at how to right size those numbers of bays, kind of overall kind of structure, so that we could also take advantage of this view here from Kent Street and kind of celebrate.
Yeah, but this is like not an important street at all. This is like one of the least. It's like it goes into a a furniture place in the back.
Zoning we wanted to kind of honor. So I think that would.
And what I would say, well, if I can go back to that, the building is 200 feet long, so the 100-foot item kind of dictated that. We can certainly modify it, but we did look at it in different ways and didn't really feel like that had a huge difference to it, frankly. It could have been 80 and 120. I don't know if that would have made a huge difference on it. I don't disagree with you, Frank, on the Kent Street. That's not exactly why we just looked through all the zoning guidelines. As we said, it was new to us, and we wanted to make sure we understood everything. So that, I think, speaking to that, and we also agree that's not a huge street, but it worked out pretty well in terms of the layout of the building. Also, the skewing to the right-hand side, it's almost like, I forget who said it now, it's almost like if in this scheme, we sort of, Tim, I think it was you, was talking about like the larger bay on one side of it. I mean, it'd kind of be almost cool that you took sort of the first two and you actually created a larger focus on that corner, sort of like a larger bay there, and broke that. This is where we didn't really understand some of the flexibility that there is in the zoning guidelines, because it's very distinct the way it's written. So we appreciate any guidance, and
true to that. I want to agree with what. Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to agree with you, Tim. I think that I like the development of option 1 from an elevation perspective, and I see some of the contemporary components that you were doing, though I am intrigued by Deborah's observation on option 3. I would say that my curiosity or my challenge with 3 is that the development of some of those details and aesthetic components of like the cornice and everything begin to make it too residential. And I don't know how those things will be developed further. And I can see the relationship of what you're trying to bring. I would be afraid those end up being in the end. And I do like, from perhaps a monochromatic perspective, how it stands, but the representation of the cornices and everything just brings it down to a.
So I agree with you, Frank. I agree about the detailing, and I guess I do the vertical emphasis of the first scheme. You know, that corner. You know, I think the fact it's divided in the middle. I'm with you too, Jim. You know, that this is the scheme that felt the most balanced. But if there's a hierarchy to the two parts of the building, you know, that made, you know, the scheme number 1, the eastern side, you know, was a longer section of it, and then the coloration was more neutral, and the other one was secondary to it. You know, I feel like, you know, right now, so I agree about the detailing of this. I feel you know, I think this is too traditional.
I think if you focus, Russ, if you can go back to 1, but if you keep this color scheme in mind, and you went back to that one, if you brought that color scheme to this one, I completely see what you're saying on it. I think that would, and that'd be a fairly easy switch, obviously. The breaking of the 100-foot. What's that?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, keep going.
Oh, I was just saying, I kind of agree. Our instinct was just like yours. This is our preferred path and option, and I think that I can see exactly what you see in the coloring. I could absolutely see how we could do that, almost sort of taking the same 2 tones and putting it on this one. The question I have is in making the first one more pronounced. Is that really an option with the design guidelines? Because that does seem to break the guideline, but I leave that up to you because you're the experts on that. So.
I hate to do this to you again, but I'm going to give you a time check. It is now 8:30. We do still have one more project. So I just want to caution the commissioners, if you want to keep talking, you know, sort of that's definitely okay, but I wanted to give you a heads up and see where you wanted to go next, if we're ready to vote, or how you'd like to move forward.
Well, so number 1, can you answer the question about whether this building has to be discontinuous at every 100 feet, or whether it can have one section 120 and another one that's 80, whatever?
The actual wording says the facade of any building greater than 100 feet must be divided vertically and designed as 2 or more separate and distinct facades. So it doesn't have to at the 100.
It does not have to be that number. No, it doesn't.
So we could
do 110 feet. You could have 10 feet, and then you know, like or 20. So it's according to what the architect wants to interpret it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, we asked the team to look at a range of options too. We looked at a very small building on the corner. We looked at a very slim building on the left-hand side. We looked at, you know, we explored, you know, a number of permutations of this, and just sort of on the refinement and the kind of the precedents and the kind of inspirations we were looking at, and kind of walking around the neighborhood a lot, we kind of landed on this sort of gasket between these 2 relatively similar scaled building facades. So I think a lot of hard work has gone into these from the team's perspective. So I think if there's some, you know, some aspects of that you know, we can talk through further, I'm happy to do that.
Well, I think it's good to know that we can do that, and I don't disagree with you. If I go back to the slide on scheme, you keep it on scheme 1 on the elevation, maybe, Russ, just without flipping, that I could easily see how the right-hand side building could be comfortably more prominent in terms of its length than the left-hand side, which I think is what we're all talking about. Even if it's 60-40% to some level like that, completely understand
Are
that.
you talking about shifting the dividing line to the left or the right?
To the left, to the left. I mean, it could go to the right as well. I shouldn't say that. I mean, you could go in two different ways. There's something about the scale of the right-hand side that feels like if you're going to make it, yeah. I mean, look, you can go either way, frankly. I mean, it doesn't really.
I mean, just to clarify, that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
If that's the desired outcome on.
It's funny, my initial thought was to shift it, to explore shifting it to the right, which would make the corner building, I guess, smaller, more vertical. And maybe I was just reacting to the ground floor plan, you know, where there's an actual change in programming the building.
Yeah, that's
But I
worth
think
looking.
that together with
That
the
would be the more
modification.
logical break, frankly, if it was tied to where the lobby really ended up.
Seems like it could make that building feel smaller in context to the neighborhood too.
Yeah.
And it is the taller building, so it would feel nice if it was a little taller.
I think I agree with my colleagues. I think within the context of the street sections that you guys showed, no two buildings on that run are really the same size or height or width. So to have two that are sort of, you know, non-identical Siamese twins does seem a little odd.
Yeah, fair comment.
Yeah. So with that, with some adjustment, either way, do we all like the idea of facade option 1 with a more neutral color palette for more similar to option 3, just to keep this moving?
I think you have to propose it, Deborah, and then we can vote on it.
Well, just, is that worth?
Formally, I would say yes.
Yeah. I make a motion that the team proceed with option 1 with a more neutral color palette, perhaps similar to option 3, and that you explore the location of the division of the two sections of the building. How's that?
I second that.
It would help if I unmute myself to do a roll call vote. Deborah.
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
And Andrew.
Yes.
All right, so we have a unanimous vote to proceed with option 1 with more neutral colors.
Can we?
Oh, I'm Tim. I'm sorry. Oh, Tim, I am so sorry. My brain was still in Middlesex. I apologize. How do you vote, Tim?
I will vote yes.
Okay.
It's still unanimous.
It is even more unanimous.
Can we just do quick landscape real quick, just before we move on to the next one, real quick?
Oh, so just a point of clarification, we also, are there also 2 additional votes that we would need to take for this to move forward related to the design guidelines and incorporation of the feedback?
Yes, so there needs to be a motion that the design guidelines have been satisfied, and whether there is a priority design guideline that needs to be emphasized, and whatever design modifications you would like to see. I think the design modifications have already been addressed in the initial motion. But in general, if we could get a motion that the design guidelines are satisfied, I think that would be very helpful.
I've got a couple more comments, if I could just share those before we go into that. I'll be quick. One is just, we talked about the location of the separation between the buildings. One other thing that's just kind of intrigued me, and I think someone's going to do an in-depth study of this eventually, but is the actual reveal between the two buildings, the width of that, the depth and the width, and what it is between the two buildings. I think, historically, when there is a design guideline that talks about piers on either side of the division between the two buildings, and I think that's met with this design. But I wonder about that kind of blank reveal and setting back, and should it be narrower, or what is the optimum width, and how do you really experience that as a pedestrian? Is it just dead space there? And historically, walking around historic neighborhoods where buildings were built right up to each other, it's just the two piers or pilasters that butt up right next to each other, and maybe there's a couple-inch gap or something. I'm wondering if that's something that would be worth exploring as well, minimizing the width of that reveal between the two facades.
It's really interesting because we studied this probably for 2 months and looked at many.
I can imagine.
It was actually one of our big conversation points going back and forth. A lot of it has to do with where the structural grid is, especially how it ties down to the parking. Apologize, we don't have that drawing, but it's actually fully modeled out. So that plays into how all these bays work out, obviously. And part two is just all the different proportions when they came together and they were sort of like artificially stuck together. It just didn't look right. And we had a wider one where we said, well, let's take a different approach. We had glass in between it. So we looked at that approach where we said, okay, let's make it wider and let's have it like more, let's have windows in it. And that still didn't feel, it made it feel like one building again somehow. And then just this joint between them with the reveal, it was a little Goldilocks. It just kind of felt right from a design perspective. I know exactly what you're saying from a historical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It just didn't feel right from the design end of it. I'm happy to share all the different studies or help you write a paper on it. You're going to be looking at this in Somerville a lot, but it was very challenging actually. This whole exercise has been interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend changing it. Perhaps if you do come back again to us, you could just, I'd like to know a little more about the materiality of that and the depth and dimensions of it.
I think the joint and how it gets designed is going to be really important. It can't, just as you said, it can't just be nothing. It has to really be a design feature that somehow, like if it was the metal one, it was almost like, how would that translate into that element? But I agree with you. It's really important to work well.
Yeah. Also, just coming back to the penthouse, mechanical penthouse. Yeah, I agree. 16 feet isn't too bad for a lab building, but it is a 3-story lab building, and not a taller building. One of the things, so you mentioned that the majority of the space is outdoor equipment. Well, one of the things that we often find is the more equipment you move indoors, the easier it is to deal with acoustic issues and mitigate acoustic issues. So I wonder if that's something that might be worth exploring, locating additional equipment in an enclosed penthouse as opposed to out in an open well, which may provide, may require a certain height for that enclosed portion, but may open up flexibility for the screen portion and the height. And to that point, I was wondering, clearly it's schematic design now. You don't have the equipment specified. There's no duct layouts. But eventually, there will be taller pieces of equipment in some locations, and there will be shorter pieces of equipment in other locations, and there'll be the flexibility to perhaps look at varying that roof height. So I wonder if there's the possibility of, if 16 feet is the number, keeping that 16 feet along Somerville Avenue, but for the kind of narrower portions that are more northerly adjacent to in our district, to provide a lower height of the penthouse there.
So in my mind, and I may be wrong about this, a lot of this becomes really dictated by acoustics. And the acoustic requirement that we're going to be required to meet with the guidelines, especially in that neighborhood. And I'm sensitive to this. I used to live in Cambridge, right in East Cambridge, right next to all the biotech buildings, and the sound issue is something very real to me. So I think about that a lot when we do these type of buildings. But those are the initial feedback that we got, that you probably need the 16 on the residential side for sound. I don't think it's really a visual issue because you're looking up at it anyways. So it's the height of the equipment. It's not so much that aspect, but I have to imagine the sound side will become really important, or we'll be forced to do that. But perhaps I'm missing something on that aspect of it. We would love to, if we can make it lower anywhere, we will, put it that way.
Yeah, I think if the equipment's outdoors, then perhaps the height might be needed to mitigate the sound. If it's indoors, perhaps it opens up additional flexibility. And that kind of got to my last point, which is there is a design guideline related to exhausts and side mitigation of that along the public way. There's underground parking. That parking will be exhausted. Was the intent to exhaust that up through the roof?
No, the parking garage, there's a shift where the garage sits over on the site. So you look at those landscape areas. The idea was to bring it out back there in grates so that the parking exhaust would work through that area and we would hide it away in the landscaping. So it's not going through the roof.
Is that also being included in the noise study?
Yes, Centec will be looking at everything from the noise perspective. They're being tasked with that. And again, as I said, we're at schematic design, so some of this is at an SD level of planning for these elements, so we haven't worked through every detail of that.
And this has been a really important point to the whole team. Recognizing we didn't really want to, we couldn't vent anything on the public frontages, and then trying to understand how best to do it. So it was hidden, just out of sight, out of mind. And I think being particularly sensitive of the noise, knowing that those garage fans fire up infrequently, but they do fire up. So I think that's something that was really taking advantage of this kind of quirky nature of the site to kind of fit those sensitively into the landscape area.
Good transition. Can we do some landscape talk? I will go quick. The parklet, that's awesome. I really like that. I think that's a really cool thing. We've seen a lot of those pop up in COVID, and it will nice to have one sort of codified. I think that's a cool place for it. I think the streetscape looks sort of very clean, really nice. The precedent image that you guys show is a rain garden. Is that a thing that I'm just not seeing? But that's sort of like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we were trying to convey is more the understory planting that would also be in the tree pits in addition to the trees. And the tree pits are a little larger than the standard 6x6. They're 6x10, I believe. And so wanting to get kind of a lush planting palette underneath the trees where the tree pits are. So that was the intent with those images.
Okay, I would definitely. So we have 6x6 at assembly, and the dog waste is a real issue on sort of the urban streets. So anything you can do to protect them would be helpful. I think the streetscape looks good. I think the streetscape's good. I think the question that I mostly have is, and it's honestly, it's the north buffer that I think is more of the challenging. I think in the beginning of the presentation, you guys said that you wanted to use the landscape to transition to the residential. And I gotta say, like a 10-foot offset off the back is just not doing that, and it's not a Nina issue. That you are not leaving her enough space to actually do that, especially if 4 feet of it is going to be eaten up by path. That landscape buffer is the same scale as the tree pit, and it's just not. It's not a meaningful transition, and it can't be. So it needs more space somehow.
The challenge on the spaces there was, I wish we had the basement plan to talk through it. It's literally to get all these parts and pieces together with structure and how it all works. There really isn't a way to do that, to give it more space. And we've tried very hard. It's just everything the way the site is so challenging to get everything into it.
And I'm sympathetic, but you guys are coming so close to that existing house on that upper corner of the left.
Yeah, there.
It really feels like the building is going out of its way to eat up every single piece of occupiable space, and it's just too much at that point.
So one thing to bear in mind on that, and I know what you're saying, but the roof that you're seeing there is only on the first floor. It's not, and that's partially below grade. So it's a little hard to see, but that back setback really to the second and third floors is that entire area that's not green. It's the whole, that green pushes that corner all the way back.
Okay. I would really ask you and compel you to try to find more space back there as a priority, because it's just not, 6 feet is not enough for it to work on. Other than that, I think that's great. The one other thing is, like, great plant list. That's awesome. I love it. I'm totally going to cop like half of that. But it would be nice to sort of like X out the stuff that we're really not going to use, just kind of knowing that you have a very limited space. So have a little bit better idea of what really would be used.
Appreciate the comments.
And then one other thing too, the green score, I did notice there's a lot of bonuses being awarded in the green score. And I think it would just be good to know kind of why and how we're getting those bonuses. I don't need to know it now, but like kind of in the future. I told you I'd be quick, so I'm done.
Just to pick up on your comment about the plant list, Andrew, and maybe bring it back to Frank's initial comment about what the actual site furnishings are, the bike racks, the bus shelter. I think it would be great just to consider every single one of those things as an opportunity for public art. You know, from
Absolutely.
the manhole
Yeah.
covers, the custom manhole covers, the bus shelter. I saw in one of the renderings the JC Disco, you know, MBTA standard manufacturer. But like, is there the opportunity to make that glass bus shelter something really cool and interesting and unique to this place, and all the site furnishings along the street?
Tim, I don't mean to burst your bubble, but we do have to have a conversation about it because it's a public sidewalk. And so we have to check in with the mobility team. And I just sent Russell an email. We'll get together with them.
That's great. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, so do we want to come back and revisit the whether the motion as to whether the design guidelines have been adequately met?
Well, I think so. We've talked about a number of potential modifications tonight. I think it would be great to see the project come back again with the facade refinements and some of the other things that we discussed. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
I second that.
I'd support that.
Okay.
All right, then I think we have, we will pause on the voting for the other motions. I mean, the one that we do have is the option 1 with a similar color, more neutral to option 3, and the idea of the where break point is between the buildings and what that break point, what the gusset might actually look like. So I think we will leave it there if that makes sense to the team. And then we will see you next time.
Okay, great. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for the
Hey,
conversation.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right, so Andrew, our next team, sorry, Mr. Abba. Graminsky.
I recuse myself and I'm going to bed.
All right.
Hi, Andrew.
Andrew stands recused. All right, Mr. Graminsky, the only Andrew left. Can you please set up our final project for the evening?
Yes, so this will be 15 McGrath. And I see the attendees already raising their hands, so I will let them in. Who will
Gentlemen,
be
you look,
presenting tonight? Mike, will that be you? Will you be presenting or will it be someone else? For sharing their screen.
Andrew, that'll be me. This is John Sullivan.
You got it.
So John is behind the demolition of my favorite
Work, was I able
billboard.
to unmute myself there? There we go. Did that work? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. I was just having a little technical difficulty with the mute. So I'm Mike Gerhart. I'm with Leggett McCall Properties, representing 15 McGrath Highway here. Very cognizant of the hour and our time limit, so I'm going to move very quickly and let John Sullivan from SGA take over. But I just did want to touch on one thing briefly before I hand it over to him on the design component. I did want to let this commission know that we have recently completed a process with the Zoning Board of Appeals related to a series of variances. Most of those are related to front yard setback, projection of the building, and a driveway in the front of the building, which you'll see in the presentation. But I did want to let the commission know that those were by variances granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals recently. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to John. We're really excited about this great gateway project on McGrath Highway. So John, I'll let you take it from there.
Thanks, Mike. Apologies, I'm just having a hard time seeing the presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
I think so. 15
Great. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here tonight. I also am mindful of the time, so I'm going to move through this pretty quickly, and I appreciate the commission staying on to review this project. I'll jump in. Mike gave a good intro. We just kind of wanted to highlight the team that we're working with. We've been working on this project for a long time, and are excited to bring some ideas about massing and some initial facade articulation to the commission. We have thought a lot about this site. We're very excited by this site, and everything that we've thought about is really framed in the city's planning that's happened over the past decade, and it's all in line with supporting innovation and supporting transit-oriented development, and really expanding Somerville as a life science cluster. So we're excited to have that central to our thinking, and inform kind of what we're here to share tonight. The site itself, again, we're very excited by by the location. It's a gateway site into Somerville. And that's something that, you know, we've spent a lot of time thinking about. It also just has great relationships to transit and the expansion of the Green Line, the community path, you know, Boynton Yards, Brick Bottom, Union Square, East Cambridge. So there's just a lot of great, you know, synergies, and we feel like this can be, you know, an opportunity really to, you know, provide a very successful building that, you know, welcomes people into Somerville, and, you know, plays an important role along the McGrath Highway corridor. Site itself is just about 44,000 square feet. Sits right along McGrath Highway, you know, right on the border to East Cambridge. You know, currently you can see the community path extension that, you know, that sits behind, you know, behind the site. It's elevated, you know, which you'll see, and it currently has, you know, single story retail that you know, sits there today. It's important to note this is in the high-rise zoning district. Everything that you see outlined in gray is within that district. Our site is identified in red. So those are the zoning you know, parameters that we're you know, working with. I'll take you through briefly. You know, again, this is you know, the current condition. You know, challenging from a public realm standpoint along McGrath Highway, you know, low scale buildings, and you know, that this is the current state of the site. So I'll take you through, you know, the way that the site works, because there's some constraints that we have been working with that, you know, really have shaped this building and, you know, really informed, you know, its location on the site and how it needs to respond to certain conditions. So again, the site's about 44,000 square feet. There are two easements that run over the site. In the rear of the site, there is an easement that belongs to the MBTA, and that's actually an elevated portion of our site. It's 12 feet above grade, kind of a retaining wall situation. And then to the front of the site, towards McGrath Highway, there's an existing access easement that is meant to provide access from the 51 McGrath Highway site. You know, that's a storage building. It's meant to, you know, allow you know, vehicles to you know, cross the site and get back to the intersection at Rufo Road. There's also a neighboring parcel that's this. You can kind of see it's this, you know, circular geometry that we refer to as the jug handle, and that's actually a Mass DOT parcel or a DCR parcel that you know, was a taking, you know, previously, and that, you know, also allows access kind of in and out to the neighboring sites that sit a little bit down below the bridge embankment for McGrath Highway. So there's some physical and legal constraints on the site that have informed, you know, where we can place a building and how the site can operate from a circulation standpoint. You know, with that, you know, we've thought a lot about circulation in terms of pedestrian arrival, where people are coming from, you know, from the Leechmere station, from Cambridge Crossing, from, you know, from the community path, and how, you know, how pedestrians, cyclists, and, you know, vehicles will be, you know, arriving on site. This shows, you know, really the only real way that we could manage, you know, vehicular circulation in terms of entering in the site at the intersection, working in a counterclockwise motion beneath our building, which you'll see, for parking access and for loading, and then exiting at the jug handle, or in some situations across the front of the site. So that put, you know, some pressure on the base of our building. You know, this is a lab building, as we've been talking a lot about tonight. There's a lot of programmatic elements that we need to manage here, but we also just needed to, you know, ultimately respect all of those parameters. And I think we came up with a good solution that, you know, allows for the ground level of the building to function in the way that it needs to, but sits the building comfortably on the site and provides a nice, you know, welcoming arrival sequence. So sitting above, you know, the ground level is the bulk of the building. This is a 9-story lab building. It'll follow the lab building typology per the zoning. It's about 245,000 square feet from a GFA standpoint, and about 145 feet in height, you know, with a mechanical level and screen level above that. So this just gives you a sense of, you know, of the the bulk of the building from a massing standpoint, and also shows you that this is, really kind of locked in from a positioning standpoint on the site. So far that, to say that we've, received, because of the way that the building needs to sit on the site, we were not able to meet the front yard setback and push towards McGrath Highway to respect the, the access easements that are in place, as well as the DCR parcel. So we received a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and that happened, about a month ago. So again, setting the context for the siting of the project. The site to the right of us here is a hotel that's being proposed, and then again some existing buildings that exist to the to the north. So with all of those constraints, we felt it was important to describe how that worked and how that needed to, how that shaped our building and how that really locked it into its positioning on the site, because that started to cue our massing, and to allow us to think about, within that context, how can we take advantage of this, of this gateway site, and really provide something that responds to its context, kind of its immediate context and its expanded context. So the three massing concepts that we wanted to share were, what we're calling the horizon concept, which, is really somewhat of a stacking approach. This was born out of, trying to establish, kind of a strong and consistent street wall with, with the proposed hotel, something that, provided a strong datum at, at the mid-rise level, and then allowed the upper levels to exist above that. I think there were some good things about that. We like the street wall, we like the scale. The stacking was a little bit hard to achieve because of, again, we're pinned into a certain geometry from a site layout standpoint, and to achieve the floor plates that we need to, it's a little difficult to push and pull too much, and it seemed to create a little bit of a stacking effect. That was one approach. The other approach we refer to as the gateway, and what we like about that was that we really brought emphasis to this corner. We think that this corner really can be an interesting statement, and recognize this building as part of the entry sequence into the city, which again we think is important. So the way that this was organized was that we kind of cut the length of the building, which brought some emphasis down to the entry at the ground plane, and really thought of that corner as being a different element. As part of that, the rooftop mechanical levels would be integrated into the facade, which is a little bit of a different approach. It would add some height at that corner, and would be a little forceful, I think, from a size standpoint, which was something we wanted to be sensitive about in terms of how we're shaping the top of the building. So then the last massing that we looked at was called we refer to as the jewel box, which is actually our preferred massing, in the sense that we feel like it takes what's good about some of the other, the two preceding, or the two previous approaches, and and gives a more scalable solution, as the building sits on the site. So it really, it still emphasizes that corner, but it brings the scale down a little bit, to still respect the the mid-rise street wall that's starting to take shape on the adjacent site. It also allows us to break the larger mass into two planes, kind of front and back, and then the body of the of the building wraps around that, what we're calling the jewel box at the corner. Because the site is very tight from a open space standpoint, not in terms of physical space, but in terms of usable space for for public realm, or building amenity. We use that jewel box as an opportunity to provide an upper level terrace, which we think can bring a real sense of community to the building, and through the architecture display what that program is, so that kind of builds on that stepping effect. And then at the roof level, again, with the with the mechanical penthouse and the screened area, we've set that in and pushed that back, and that that was deliberate. We wanted to emphasize that stepping and have that element. It'll be present and it'll be well articulated, but we did want to pull it back from the facade and have it be secondary to the massing moves that are happening below. And all of these, we recognize that the building steps in at the lower level to facilitate the circulation. So those were the three approaches, and I can just run through the diagrams very quickly. Again, this is the approach that has more of the horizontal emphasis, and with the larger massing move at the mid-rise level. This shows the emphasized corner, again, extending the height and really bringing height to that corner. And then this shows some of the sequence around pulling the corner back and breaking out that element and giving it a little bit of a more scaled approach, where that jewel box is a focal point. The facade around it serves to support it. And then there's a stepping that that starts to inform how the roofscape is shaped. So we think there's merit in things that we learn from from all of these approaches, but from our standpoint, we're really excited by this approach because we think it provides a more scaled response to the site, while recognizing some of those important datums. So within the context of, and you can see this, with some articulation applied. So it's within that context that we really started to look at, some initial thoughts around the facade and how the facade can be expressed. Running through, our three options, and again, these are preliminary because we're happy and excited to get feedback as it relates to the massing. But again, within the context of the preferred approach, we looked at, three different treatments, and you can see the comparison here. One is a little bit more, techy and, incorporates some lighter materials. You see to the left, the one in the middle, which is our preferred approach, is a little more refined with some glazing elements that that incorporates some depth and rhythm across the facade, and really serves to allow that that jewel box to stand out and be something special. And then the third one to the right is a little bit more ordered and born from a thought around industrial architecture, which we can share. So based on those, the preferred design, this just gives you some ideas around materiality. We're still working through specific systems and details, but the thought is that would be very transparent, although it will have a high performance facade assembly, crisp, clean, and we'll employ some of the vertical fin ideas and accent panels that you see here to really bring the facade some movement and some rhythm and give it some depth to I think add some prominence from an oblique angle. You can see some thoughts on the terracing, and you can see some thoughts on the screening and some a little bit of light and airy treatment to what that can be. And then again, seeing it on the building, really employing the fins and the accent panels on the main portion of the facade, which wraps over the jewel box, to give it some depth, to give it what we think is a very interesting rhythm. Transparent, you'll see the structural grid through the glass, and then a notched area that again serves to really accentuate the lower jewel box, which we think is really a prominent moment in the building, and again serves to help transition the scale and provide an area for the activated terrace. You can see our ground plane and our arrival. We'll have some more detail around that, and then the roof screen, which we know will be an important part of the overall expression. And again, kind of we see that as more of a supportive element. This just gives you a sense of that organization and elevation. So then precedents for, for the other, for one of our alternate options, again, what we wanted to test here, which we like the idea is something that's more techy, and employs some light colors. There's some depth and more of a punched expression as it relates to the facade, and then using some framing elements to accentuate the corner component. You can see that applied to the preferred massing. And again, we think that this could be interesting and successful. I think it lacks some of the refined nature of what our preference is, and that's what drove us towards stepping the other one forward. And here you can see it in elevation. And then the third idea is born from an idea about celebrating industrial architecture and some of the historic industrial manufacturing building types that you'd find in this area. And again, this is exciting. It ties back to a lot of building types that you would find in Somerville and East Cambridge. Historically, we thought that this could be an interesting way to try to apply this to the building and give a modern expression to that idea. It relates to an ordered effect on the main portion of the building. We'd still contrast the podium. So we think there's some good ideas, I think, in a lot of these approaches. To us, we've done buildings like this before, where it really tries to interpret that that framing and industrial vernacular. And on the scale of this building, it seems I think a little forced. So again, I think some good ideas, but that's again what led us back to to the approach that felt a little bit more refined and a little bit more light and airy, particularly for this site. And then you can see that here in elevation as well. So to just share some more views, and again, this we're working through some of the detail here. This shows the staggering of the panels, which again we feel like gives some motion and some interest to the facade that frames the corner piece. And again, really a kind of a clean gem at that jewel box element that we feel like will be detailed in a real refined way. It may incorporate some vertical fins, but more ordered to play off some of the fin expression that's happening at the main body of the facade. And then again, very early in kind of in our development as it relates to specific material, but some views from the other sides of the building. And this shows the corner of the building that faces the northwest. You can see there's a similar organization around the primary facade that faces the community path. That element that is framed kind of towards the upper corner of the building, we felt like was an important moment as it looks back towards the Union Square area, and will be seen from that area. And then another important thing to note is on the west side of the building. You can kind of see to the right of this massing, is that we have a really, again, based on the site constraints that we identified before, we have a very tight lot line condition. So we're only permitted a certain amount of, or we're only allowed a certain amount of glazing. So that wall will take on a more solid nature. And again, the tone will be to be determined in terms of what that material actually is, but we see that as a really nice opportunity to provide a material expression that that really anchors this building on the west end. And you can see a little bit of that here, from McGrath looking back towards, towards the city. You can pick up the depth on the primary facade, and then again, some of the solid portions that anchor that west side of the facade, and we feel like could be very expressive. So, just a quick, just a quick overview of the public realm. We'll share a site plan here in a minute, but a lot of our public realm towards the McGrath side will be focused on, drop off and kind of a shared, arrival moment for pedestrians and for, ride share and that sort of thing. This would be the palette of materials that we'd suggest, interesting hardscape patterns, some warmer and more earthy tones.
Hey, John, can you wait for a minute? John, hold on for a second. John, can you hold on for a second? Luisa, Sarah, are we also approving this for public realm and building?
I would imagine
hear me or
that, yeah, can you hear me?
It's not part of, yeah, now I can hear, but it's not part of the agenda, and the agenda doesn't say public realm and building. So my question is this a twofer or because it wasn't clear?
I would imagine so, but let's ask Andrew.
So I believe that this is part of the building landscaping. I wasn't under the impression that there was a public realm associated with this.
I wasn't under the impression either.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, I would ask for the landscape architect one of the landscape architects to be presenting on this. So
maybe I could jump in, and we do have Ian Ramey from Copley Wolf here who can run through this. But this is not,
John. It's not part of the agenda. I think the way that and Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not part of the agenda, right? Because it wasn't clear on the agenda.
No, it was just the building. We always break it down to two parts if there is a civic space associated.
Yeah. So John, it's only the building then tonight.
So we don't have.
Frank, I don't know that they have a public space. What they have is their property area and a green score, and they're showing us. It's not. I don't believe it's classified as a civic space.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. It's just landscaping and it's the site improvements that are associated with the building. We do not have civic space per the definition of the bylaw.
At the same time, I will say, and John probably knows this, that you should spend some time with us with Public Space and Urban Forestry, because it's a public streetscape and we'll want to talk to you about amenities, city standards, concrete, street trees, all of that.
Absolutely, we'd like to do that. Yeah, this is not kind of an official civic space. It's just kind of the open space on site.
And where you're going to relocate my favorite
sign.
Sign, yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's a landmark. I can run through a couple more slides to just give a sense of what that may feel like, or if that's not appropriate, we could just kind of have a conversation around the building.
You have
and just
over
to give you
your
a heads
20
up,
minutes at some point.
I have gone
so
over the 20.
Sorry, John.
That's okay. I just couldn't quite tell what the feedback was in terms of advancing or just kind of moving towards the discussion.
Was the next slide a ground floor plan?
Yeah, this is a ground floor plan, and then we have a little axon that kind of talks about the ground floor program.
Okay. If we're going to talk about the public realm either separately or another time, that's totally fine. I just thought it was helpful to a conversation about the building to understand what's happening on the ground floor as well.
Okay, yeah, well, I can run through these slides quickly. I think it is helpful just to talk, probably to just give an understanding of how the building works specifically because of, how it needs to respond to the site. So this is that, the ground plane, and everything that you see, towards the front of the site is that arrival court that we're just describing. Vehicles enter the site here and will enter and exit the garage towards the rear of the site. This is all under the building, and then loading happens downstream of that, again kind of under the building, inboard of the MBTA easement. which allows for kind of a one-way movement that allows, again, that, will allow, cars to, or trucks to exit the site. This is our lobby, and this is our front door. And actually, maybe the next slide shows it better here, just from a program standpoint. But that describes that movement around, around and under the building. The area identified in blue is really our lobby and amenity zone. A lot of that's focused on bikes, which is located kind of on this part of the site, which is in close proximity to the way we think bikes are going to arrive from the connection to the community path. And then our arts and creative space is located, along that front entrance and turns the corner. So we really have an active zone towards this side of the building. And in the constraints of our floor plan, we're to the west. We're solving for a lot of our back of house activities to support the lab use, working around the easements and working around the site requirements. So just helpful, I think, maybe to just kind of show you how we're thinking about program. And then, just one image that kind of shows, dimensionally kind of the relationship between the sidewalk, the planted buffer, the drop off and plaza, and how, people will be arriving to the building. And this is all, kind of in coordination with improvements that are, being proposed for McGrath Highway and, part of that context. So with that, I can move back towards the, towards the building and would welcome comments from the commission. And I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Can I ask
I couldn't see everyone while I was presenting, so sorry about that.
I'd love to ask a couple of questions about the design. So the jewel box element, is that coplanar with the rest of the south facade? Or is it forward of behind? And how deep is the gap between the main facade and the jewel box facade?
This is about 18 inches. These are coplanar. And again, there's some additive elements that, will give it more depth. But, to kind of keep the floor plate and to keep the structure, as we'd like it along this edge, we're trying to use the notch to recess that to, emphasize the corner while allowing, these two pieces to be in the same, in the same plane.
So how much of that is the top of the jewel box outdoors? Is it just the sort of southeast section?
It's this portion over here.
But so that sticks out. Actually, that looks coplanar with the piece in the back, but the section right above it, is pushed back, right? It's not coplanar. I'm just trying to figure out where all the planes are.
Yeah, no, this from this face here, it's about 15 to 18 feet in terms of the depth of that terrace.
Mm-hmm.
And then this upper wall, is provides a little bit of cover for that terrace, but sits back about 10 feet from or 10 to 15 feet from the face to the east.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, John, I do like the preferred massing of the jewel box. I would have to say that the distinction between the box and the rest of the building is not distinct enough to make it a jewel. And if I squint my eyes, it looks the same. And materiality, it looks the same. And I'm trying to find really you showed some really interesting precedent images that really depicted an actual jewel box in some instances that was either framed somehow or had a change to reality. But I think that in this case, your jewel box is not really jumping out to me the way that you describe it. And I think it's a question of materiality. I we have to, definitely, I mean, I think that the idea of pointing where things are, I think is also, the rendering is not being just to, but my big concern initially looking at the facades and the massing option is that from a materiality perspective and from a massing perspective, what you refer to as a jewel box is not really jumping out to me as a distinct element that breaks this box a lot. I mean, I think I like the approach. I like the way that you described it, what it's supposed to be, and this element that's almost like has been inserted, but it doesn't read that to me, and it doesn't do justification to the way that you presented it. And I think that I would love for you to explore that expression a little bit more, because it is a predominant facade, it is a predominant entry into the city. Aside from the fact that you are removing my favorite liquor store of all time, and I will hold you to that. It is important to understand that this is a very symbolic approach into the city and into other components. So what your facade is trying to say, I think is important. And I don't think that you're being successful with your jewel box interpretation from a material perspective and from a massing perspective.
Yeah, Frank, I appreciate that comment, and I thank you for the feedback on the kind of the general massing approach. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make that corner really be a strong moment, and I think those were helpful comments that we can explore. We earlier in the process we did look at applying a little bit of a warmer finish to the jewel box itself to help it stand out and give it some color and some to differentiate itself. And I think there could be a path to doing that more kind of through material, like you said, applied to the jewel box itself or potentially to the main body. But we can certainly explore those ideas. And I
mean, it would really help the scale of the building as well. I mean, you said it's a 9-story building, right? 9 stories, you said?
Yeah, right.
And I think that if you read it initially right now, you read the whole thing as you read it completely as 9 stories because of the materiality. And I think that if you were to treat the box some way, it would become so predominant that it would kind of like give a scale to that front piece, and maybe the higher part might become secondary to it, depending on how important you make the jewel box. But right now it's still looking like a big 9-story box, right? And I think that there's an opportunity there that I think that you can play with to do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think overall, it's a complicated site as you represented it. It's a very complex. It's got easements, it's got drives, it's got T on one side, it's got the highway on the other side. It's complex, so I applaud you on trying to do something with it, and it's successful from a planning perspective. I think that you're getting there, and I think I'm just questioning the materiality and the approach with the jewel box, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's a good comment. I agree. Maybe the only thing I'll add to that is picking up on what you were talking about, John, about maybe adding a warmer tone or materiality to there. I don't think a jewel box needs to necessarily be all glass. It doesn't need to be all transparent. It could be something that's more solid, and maybe the other volume of the building is more transparent and that's more solid, and that's a way to differentiate them.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that gives us some good ideas to explore. We call it the jewel box, but in some instances, I think it would want to be if it was different enough, and the fact that it was fully transparent and clean made it feel like that. But on the other side of that, maybe there's some material changes or emphasis that brings the box forward, and it's not relying on the main facade to set it apart. It kind of sets itself apart. So I think those are good comments, and certainly something that we can look at. That's what we want to achieve, is to really set that corner off. So we can certainly think through some of those ideas.
And I think that coming around the corner and then being differentiated materially from the kind of more vertical, narrow piece there on the right side of the building will help set that apart, even though I think you just said that those are in plane with each other, those two facades?
They are, yeah. And again, that's a little bit of a byproduct of us just being hemmed in on how the building fits. Honestly, the relief that we got for the building was to cut back the underside, you know, to make the circulation work. So, you know, we're feeling some dimensional pressure. That's why we're trying to utilize the notch to make that break.
Yeah. One of the other things that jumped out at me was the I guess the corner on the left-hand side. I'm not actually sure of orientation here. Where, yeah. Yeah, exactly, that corner. I'm not sure. And I understand the rationale for the lot line condition there and having a much more solid wall along that side, but I wonder what happens there at that corner where it comes around and just becomes a more glass facade. The corner that we're looking at, I mean, it seems very three-dimensional, and that feels like a much more two-dimensional move there.
Is this, Tim, is this the view? Yeah. In terms of turning some of the material around the corner or some kind of dimensional transition?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I think that's something we can look at.
There's also, and I wanted to see the ground floor plan in part because looking at these images, it didn't look like the building was coming down and touching the ground anywhere. And in fact, it isn't. It's actually, the whole building is essentially suspended. You know, all these primary facades are above the ground level as you have the vehicular circulation.
It actually does. It's a little, again, because of all the you know, because of the way that we needed to treat it, you know, some of the facade over here underneath the jewel box pushes in and actually kind of creates a little bit of a, you know, projection above from the jewel box itself. This portion of the building comes down to the ground, and this moment here would be like an outlet from some of the circulation moments, but these, you know, most of this facade would engage with the ground. We've just kind of struck a datum here to align with where we had to set the building back to, you know, to kind of
solid wall with the ground.
You know, we're right now it is. We're working through it, but that's where we're trying to manage some of our back of house, you know, program. Kind of just flipping back over to this. So that this is kind of a busy diagram, but this red rectangle, you know, kind of shows the floor plate up above. And then this would be, you know, more of our public zone along the frontage, and then our back of house, you know, sits towards the west.
Okay. And the transition between the more transparent facade that's set in and the more solid facade, that's happening at the transition between the jewel box and the rest of the building.
It is, yeah. You can see it a little bit here. This is the arrival, and then as it relates to the, just trying to find the right image here. But as it relates to, you know, kind of how the notch is oriented, that notch comes down and starts to form the entry moment, and it's that edge that sets that transition at the base.
I guess maybe it's the carrying of that datum over that seems perhaps inconsistent with the idea of this jewel box that's set off from the other facade, that's held off at the ground. It's totally separate. That datum at the jewel box is part of that, and I wonder if the rest of the facade just wants to come down to the ground and anchor this to the ground in some way, or at least feel more like part of the rest of that. So
I think we like the datum because there's some things that we just need to manage below that point that it, you know, kind of allows us to do. And it does feel like this sits on a, look a little bit more of a solid element, but we could certainly look at, bringing that facade down to the ground and thinking about how to just manage some of the openings that we'd need for the, for the circulation component.
So are you done, Tim?
Yeah, I have a few more thoughts, but go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, yeah, so I agree that this is the more interesting strategy, but I really feel like the jewel box needs an idea. What makes it distinct from the rest of the facade? It's all, it's all glass, it's all reflecting sky. I see the clouds and reflected in both of them. Is one of them more of a mirror and one of them more flat? Is there, and what relationship does that have with that end panel also? And I feel like the gap is really important and how that's detailed also.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it were deeper, and this is south facing, so really, outdoor space, is going to be pretty interesting here. I know it's square footage, but the whole perimeter would take advantage of being outdoor space, or it's just deeper above, and there's something, and so there's 3 different types of glass. You have to sort of find an idea about, what each is trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
It's one about really fine grain detailing in, much tighter mullion pattern, that sort of vexes the floor, the reading of the floor levels. Is there, I'm just, going off on a lot of different ideas. Is there some depth, some, what do you call it? Yeah, depth to one of the facades, maybe the primary one. But I feel like it really, to be successful and to read as anything, distinct and gateway-like, I think it needs to be, quite distinct from the rest of the building. And maybe it hangs down a little lower than everything else too, or something like that, that ground floor, maybe it's a subtle thing, but,
Yeah.
it separates as like it's falling down a little bit or something, it just has to, I feel like it needs to loosen up from the facade, the main facade.
Mm-hmm. I certainly think we can look at those ideas. I mean, kind of similar to the other comments, whether that's through materiality or, through a different, different expression on either the body or the jewel box itself. And I think that's an interesting comment too, about maybe, treating how it sits in relation to the base a little bit different. So good comments. We want that corner to be a really, strong moment, that works and feels really comfortable kind of with the rest of the building. And I understand the need for distinction.
So on that, John, I think that we're probably not going to take a vote on it. I mean, I think that obviously everybody has a preferred scheme, but I think that we would rather see you come back for us to take a full vote on all of the things with our comments. So we would love to see you come back, incorporating some of the things that we said, and then we can take a full vote at that point during that. I think if it's okay with the committee.
Or could we take a vote on the massing, right? That's what and
sure, we can take a first vote and yes.
The facade is another. It becomes another vote.
So
yeah,
I'd be comfortable with that.
Do you want a motion?
I move.
Motion.
I move we accept the jewel box, that we advise the jewel box option to proceed.
I second that.
All right, roll call vote. Tim Talon.
Yes.
Frank.
Yes.
Deborah.
Yes.
All right, now we all really do have a unanimous vote. All right, and so I think unless there are any more questions, I think the direction is clear for what we need to talk about next time. And I do want to point out too that the team, because it'll be 2 weeks before the next design review meeting, I recommend that you reach out to the PSUF team sooner than later to follow up on Louisa's comment.
I did have some thoughts about the sidewalk design along McGrath, but I can hold those until the next meeting if there's going to be outreach to public space in the meantime.
I think that probably makes sense, but it's up to Louisa. Louisa, you're muted.
Still muted.
You're still muted.
Oh. No, she's
Now
frozen.
you're frozen.
Yeah, she's frozen.
No,
Nope.
no.
Okay, at least it's not me
Louisa,
this
you
time.
can text me and I will be your mouthpiece if you want.
While Luis is texting, I just, to thank Frank and Tim and Deborah for the thoughtful comments. Helpful to get clarity on the massing, because now I think we can really hone in on some of the facade, studies that you were referencing. So very much appreciate it.
No, we appreciate what you're doing. So it's interesting. Did you get the text, Sarah?
Not yet.
Okay.
So he's trying to log back in.
That might have been a good. That might have been a good buy.
Maybe she can use the chat too.
Andrew, do you have her muted?
It said earlier that she was unmuted and now went back to muted. I'm sorry, Louisa. Wait, now it says you're unmuted.
Oh. All right.
Yourself muted? Oh dear.
All right. Okay. Maybe she can write a memo. All right. I think in the essence of time, I would say that Luisa, if your final thoughts, you can put them in an email, share them with the group, and I think that will distribute them. But I think that John and Mike have their marching orders, and you should reach out, John, to Luisa and the group so that you can plan accordingly with some of the city components and infrastructure so that you're heading in that direction. I think that will be very helpful so that, she will be able to interact with you in that and give you direction on that.
Yeah, we'll do
I'd
that
like
right
to have
away and get that, make that contact. So we're making sure that we get the information passed over and talk to Ian over at Copley Wolf and work that through. So we'll jump right on that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'd like to have a more focused discussion about that whole sidewalk section from McGrath and towards the lobby next time.
I will give you guys a little bit of background information too. So there is ongoing meetings between us and Cambridge and DOT on this stretch of McGrath and what a potential redesign to Rufo Road looks like and access to the community path south of the Summer Bridge Hotel, which is number 1 McGrath. So this team, the hotel site, and to some degree 35 McGrath have all been working together with us and especially Brad for mobility to understand what the vehicular movements need to be in that area. So
That's great, because if you stand there for like an hour and look at the behavior of people trying to cross the street from the McDonald's side to the bus stop, it is a huge, awful problem. and
Yeah,
it is not
it is a
pedestrian
dangerous
friendly.
high-speed mess.
Dangerous. It's not, and it's not your realm, obviously, but it is within your property and your development to think about that. People run through that because the lights is just, something could be done that I think that enhances really the transition from one side to the other, because your property is going to need to acknowledge that somehow. But if you stand there, you'll see the behavior of people crossing the street, and it'll give you information about it. I've seen it, and it's interesting. People hate it.
Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do with the Department of Transportation and with Sarah's department and with Brad and the city of Cambridge as well in DOT, because we've got the Grand Junction path coming into the community path extension. How are we going to get bicyclists and pedestrians across McGrath and Rufo safely? Probably adding a crosswalk on the other side of the intersection to make that a true box, reconfiguring the lights. That there's a lot of work that needs to happen to make that safe and efficient for both, getting it more bike and ped friendly. It's got to happen. And then, so there's a lot of work to do there. And we know we need to do that.
Thank you, Mike. I think we can let them go, right, Sarah?
I think so. I think Louisa has given up.
John, Mike, we'll see you next time.
That's great. Thank you.
Take care, John.
All right.
Take care, Mike.
Thank you both.
Good night.
In that case, we need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, minutes, Sarah. We need to approve the minutes.
Yeah, we need to approve minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Do we-
All right.
Oh,
Do you do it
Joanne.
in one motion?
I've
Also,
got 3
we are
minutes.
approving the mail. Oh, sorry. Go on, Frank.
No, I've gone through them, so I read through them and we corrected some things. I motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, roll call vote. Deborah,
yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Tim.
Yes.
Okay, the minutes are approved. Now can I get
Now
a
I
motion?
motion to adjourn.
I second.
All right, roll call vote. Deborah,
Yes.
Frank,
Yes.
Yes.
Tim.
Yes. Yes.
Meeting is now adjourned at 9:52
Dinner
p.m.
time.
4 hours. Yes.
Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Soon.
Bye.